from the high desert and the great American Southwest, the desert. No pyramids that I know of, but the desert. I wish you all a great good morning and good evening, depending on your time zone across all these many, from the Tahitian and Hawaiian Islands, east to the Caribbean and the U.S. Virgin Islands, south into South America, north to the pole, worldwide on the Internet. And that's getting to be a mouthful. Good morning, this is Coast to Coast AM. I'm Art Bell. As promised, with us this morning is Graham Hancock, author of Fingerprints of the Gods, The Sign and the Seal, and the recent The Message of the Sphinx. I will learn with you this morning, and what a journey it's going to be. So that's what's on tap. In a moment, we get underway. Graham is on his U.S. book tour. Presently caught up with him in Chicago, where he's probably not going to get very much rest in his hotel room. Underway in a moment. Well, all right, here we go. Now, as promised, on his American tour in Chicago in a hotel room where he's probably not going to get very much sleep, here's Graham Hancock. Graham, hi.
Hi, good morning to you.
Oh, it's so good to hear your voice without the delay that we get when I called you one night in London.
Yes, that's right, or one morning as it was in my case, yes.
That's right. It was
absolutely,
good.
We had a bad line that time.
Well, listen, it's great to have you on the program, and Richard Hoagland, who I have interviewed many, many times, badgered me as if he had to get you on the program. And
I'm glad he did that.
Well, I am too. And so
Richard is a good friend, and Richard and I, together with my co-author Robert Boval, presented two major conferences recently in England, one at Imperial College London and the other at Leeds University, where we made common cause with Richard on the issue of freedom of information and freedom of knowledge and freedom of ideas, because the work that Richard is doing, particularly regarding the structures, the apparent structures on Mars, is of enormous importance and enormous interest, and we feel that it's extraordinary that this work has not been followed up by the powers that be, and we've been trying to draw attention to that with him in England, and it has many points in common with the suppression of knowledge regarding the pyramids and the Great Sphinx of Egypt.
Yes, you and I have common cause. I have done the same thing with Richard, and I guess, Graham, the answer is that a lot of scientific paradigms and careers are challenged by tampering with conventional wisdom in those areas. Graham, before we get started, tell us a little bit about Graham Hancock. Not everybody knows. What is your background, Graham?
My background, well, how far shall we go back? I was born in 1950 in Edinburgh in Scotland, so I'm 45 years old now. Mm-hmm. I lived in India as a child. My father is a medical doctor, and we lived in southern India. I went to university in the north of England, and I became a journalist and a writer. I worked for The Economist newspaper and wrote regularly for the London Sunday Times and The Guardian and other newspapers. I was deeply interested in Africa and in the events of Africa. I covered the war between Somalia and Ethiopia in 1977 as a war correspondent. I lived in East Africa for several years in Somalia and in Kenya. I was finally the East Africa correspondent for The Economist, visited Ethiopia many times. And it was through visiting Ethiopia, and at that time with purely an interest in politics and famine and wars and economics, that I came across Ethiopia's extraordinary claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant, as in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the biblical Ark that supposedly contained the Ten Commandments written by the finger of God. And I discovered that this claim was ridiculed by scholars. They regarded it as laughable and as funny and as a primitive superstition, but the more I looked into it, the more intriguing it seemed to me that it was. Ethiopia is the only country in the world that claims to possess this amazing relic, and there's a living tradition of worship of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, and there's an indigenous population of Ethiopian Jews who practice a pre-Talmudic Judaism. They seem to have been cut off from the main body of Judaism for thousands of years. And I thought, hey, this claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant is not without foundation, and I decided to look into it initially from the perspective of an investigative reporter, an investigative journalist, and it led me down an avenue of discovery and learning concerning the mysteries of the past of humanity, because I came to realize that we're a species with amnesia, that we all know almost nothing about our own past, and therefore we know almost nothing about ourselves. And researching and writing The Sign and the Seal, the book about the Ark of the Covenant, led me to Egypt and the mystery of the sudden, fully formed emergence of Egyptian civilization at around 3,000 years ago, apparently out of nowhere, and that led me into the mystery of a lost civilization, which is what I cover in Fingerprints of the Gods, and finally returning to this matter in much greater depth in the message of the Sphinx. So that's Graham Hancock as a writer and as an investigator. I'm a family man. I have 6 children. I've been married twice before, and I'm married again now. My wife is Santa. She's a wonderful woman. She's changed my life. She's brought meaning and spirituality into my life, and we pursue this quest for knowledge and learning together.
Is it a driven thing with you, Graham? Are you driven to do this?
I feel totally caught up and captivated and entranced by the mystery of the past. I feel that there has been a huge forgotten episode in human history, a lost civilization, a chapter in the story of mankind that we have forgotten entirely, and that this lost, forgotten period in our history is unrepresented in the modern world. It has no ambassadors in the modern world. Nobody speaks for the past. Our scholars simply write off the prehistory of mankind as a period of primitive superstition when men lived in caves, and they don't realize the mystery and the magic that lies there. And what I sense is an ancient voice trying to come through to us through the veil of the past, and I have tried to speak for that ancient voice, to give it a voice in the modern world, to allow it to be heard, and to do so with reason and with argument. There's a great deal of wishy-washy material out there in the so-called New Age field where people speculate wildly and have woolly ideas, and this is not going to change the way that people think. The only way that we can change a paradigm, that we can change a fixed and rigid system of ideas, is to fight that system of ideas on its own terms. And that's what I've tried to do in my books, particularly in Fingerprints of the Gods and in the new book, The Message of the Sphinx, is to present solid, reasoned evidence which any person with common sense can see makes sense and which does challenge the existing view of history.
Well, there might be some who would say that you, in fact, are all wrong. In fact, a lot of people, Graham, who have a lot at stake, you know, in the traditional paradigm, entire lives and careers and theorems are built about the way it was supposed to be.
Yes.
So, how is all this received by peer colleagues?
Well, you know what? The conclusion that we're coming to, particularly with the Egyptian material that I cover in Fingerprints of the Gods and that we go into in more depth in the Message of the Sphinx, is that, in a sense, the Egyptologists, who are the self-appointed specialists in this area, have made themselves irrelevant to the argument. We no longer seek their approval. We no longer seek their acceptance of our ideas in this field. The evidence that we present speaks for itself, and our strategy and our policy is to go directly to the public. When I say when I speak in the plural, I'm talking here about Robert Bauval and myself. He's the author of a book called The Orion Mystery, which presented the Orion correlation, and an extraordinary breakthrough in the understanding of the pyramids. And he and I got together to work on the Message of the Sphinx. And what we feel is that the Egyptologists are irrelevant to this argument. The public are not listening to them anymore. The tired old theories about the pyramids being tombs of megalomaniac pharaohs, the fixed and rigid idea of what ancient Egypt was, is just no longer accepted by the majority of the general public today. And the burden of proof has shifted. It's no longer on us to prove that we are right. It's now for the Egyptologists to prove that we are wrong. It's not acceptable anymore for them to stand up there and say, well, listen, I'm the professor of Egyptology at the Oriental Institute in Chicago, and I know that you guys are wrong, and therefore please go away. The public just won't accept that anymore. As a matter of fact, when I say the word Egyptologist at public conferences and conventions these days, the word alone causes the whole audience to burst into laughter.
Listen, Graham, don't be afraid to get in their face.
I'm not.
That was a joke. All right, Graham, exactly what are the pyramids?
Okay. Let's first of all deal with the Egyptological orthodoxy. They tell us that the three great pyramids of Egypt are the tombs of three megalomaniac pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, three pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, who ruled at around the period of 2500 BC. And they say that that's all they are, tombs and tombs only. They say that the great Sphinx is a monumental statue that was carved to aggrandize the ego of one of those pharaohs, Pharaoh Khafre, and that the face of the Sphinx is carved into his image, and that it was created in 2500 BC. And if you look this matter up in any encyclopedia, or if you read it in any orthodox popular text, such as the National Geographic magazine or the misleadingly named Time Life Lost Civilization series, you'll see this same tired, old theory being regurgitated again and again as though it were the revealed truth of God. And nobody ever tells us that that's all it is. It's just a theory. It's just the opinion of a very few, by the way, scholars. It's just their opinion based on no facts whatsoever. The Egyptological notion that the Great Pyramids are tombs is purely and simply a matter of opinion. No burial of any pharaoh has ever been found inside those colossal and extraordinary monuments. They are completely bare. They contain no inscriptions whatsoever. They are stark, austere, and anonymous. They stand out there on the Giza Plateau, begging the intelligent and the curious to work out what they are. But they tell us one thing very definitely about themselves, that they were built by master astronomers and master engineers with skills and talents almost beyond human imagining. The
Graham, you said that there was nothing in them, at least no burial point.
No burials,
Fine.
no mummified body ever found,
all right,
no sarcophagus ever found.
Gotcha. What is in them? Aren't there chambers and so forth and so on? Now, I've never been there, so I don't know.
All of the three pyramids of Giza have chambers in them.
Yes.
Known chambers, and as we show in the message of the Sphinx, as yet undiscovered chambers as well. The two secondary pyramids, the second pyramid and the third pyramid, have just one major chamber each. The third pyramid has a group of smaller chambers as well, and these are underground. The chamber systems are under the ground, under the base of the pyramid, but the Great Pyramid, the pyramid that Egyptologists attribute to Khufu, contains a subterranean chamber which is 100 feet below ground. Mm-hmm. It contains the so-called Queen's Chamber, and this attribution is purely arbitrary. There's no basis for it, which is in the superstructure of the monument about 100 feet above ground. And about a further 100 feet above that, there's a third, much larger chamber with a group of smaller chambers above it. These are massive cavities in some cases inside the body of this 6 million ton monument. They're joined up by an intricate network of corridors and passageways. And mysteriously, in the Great Pyramid, there are 4 very narrow shafts, 2 of them from the so-called King Chamber. These are 8 inches wide and 8 inches high, cut all the way through the body of the monument. They rise at an incline, at an angle, and they exit on the outside of the monument. So the 2 lower shafts from the so-called Queen's Chamber do not exit on the outside of the monument. They stop somewhere inside that vast 6 million ton bulk. And this, the mystery of these shafts is one of the issues that we investigate in the message of the Sphinx, because at the end of one of those shafts, in 1993, after an exploration by a small robotic camera, was discovered a door complete with 2 metal handles. And an amazing archaeological scandal surrounds what has happened concerning that door and the chamber that lies beyond it, and also a chamber that lies deep beneath the Great Sphinx.
Yikes. What, aside from when we get down to the very mysterious door and so forth, what use do you suppose all these chambers had? What function? What use?
Well, it's going to take us some time to talk this through. This is a deep and mysterious matter, but there's something that I want to draw attention to right now, and that is the precision of the Great Pyramid. Mm-hmm. Remember that this monument is supposed to be the tomb of a megalomaniac pharaoh,
right?
Although no burial was ever found inside it. The Great Pyramid weighs 6 million tons. It has a footprint of just under 14 acres, and it stands more than 450 feet tall. Mysteriously, it is perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. The north-south faces of the Great Pyramid are better aligned to true north and south than the meridian building of the Greenwich Observatory in London. The Greenwich Observatory in London is 9/60ths of a degree off true north. The Great Pyramid, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, the oldest massive construction on Earth, is just 3/60ths of a single degree off true north. And this tells us beyond any shadow of a doubt that astronomers of astonishing skill and talent were at work in the surveying and setting out of this amazing monument. And this is the first clue as to its function, because it speaks the language of astronomy. And astronomy is a language that can pass and transcend the passage of thousands of years and the change of cultures and symbols. It's a language that any intelligent civilization can decode. If we wish to understand these monuments, we have to look to astronomy. We have to look to the stars. And therein lies the beginning of a trail of clues that leads finally to a conclusion.
Graham, at the time the pyramids were built, did mankind have the knowledge to determine very nearly precisely true north?
Well, not according to Orthodox history, no. Didn't have the knowledge to do that at all. And also, the question that arises is, when were the pyramids built? Orthodox Egyptologists say that the pyramids were built in 2500 BC. But that, again, is a statement of opinion. These monuments are made of stone, and you cannot date stone monuments by any objective technique. Carbon dating only dates organic material.
Right.
Therefore, you need to look to other sciences to put a dating on these monuments. And we think that the story of these monuments, the chronology of these monuments, is extremely different to the chronology presented by Egyptologists. And that although the period of 2500 BC does figure in their story, it's only part of their story, and that the origins and the genesis of this amazing site go back to 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago, the end of the last ice age, when very strange things were happening on this planet, a time of mystery and darkness about which very little is known. And the evidence that links the 3 Great Pyramids and the Great Sphinx to the date of 10,500 BC is astonishingly strong. And we present that evidence in the new book, in The Message of the Sphinx.
I'd like to talk a little bit about that evidence, because if you cannot date to 2500 BC, how can you date to almost 10,000 years even earlier than that?
Through 2 precise sciences. One is astronomy, and the other is geology. And as I said a moment ago, it's astronomy that really holds the key to these monuments, because what we've discovered and what we present is simply this, that the 3 Great Pyramids map on the ground the pattern of 3 prominent stars in the sky.
All right, hold that thought, Graham. We'll come right back to it. Graham Hancock is my guest. He's in Chicago. It doesn't matter where you are. You're in for the ride of your life. The modern-day Indiana Jones, Graham Hancock, right back. From Chicago, Graham Hancock. Graham, where were we?
We were in the 3 stars of Orion's belt.
Yes, we were.
We were talking about the majestic plan that is transcribed on the ground of the Giza Plateau in Egypt, the plan that Egyptologists, the self-appointed academic interpreters of this site, have never noticed.
Yes.
And still to this day regard as a coincidence, if they even accept that it exists at all. To explain this plan, let me first of all preface it with a remark about a huge piece of architecture in the United States. I don't know whether I correctly refer to it as the Boulder Dam or the Hoover Dam.
Well, Boulder Dam, I think.
Boulder Dam will do. And the state is Colorado, or?
Well, Boulder Dam is down here. It's Nevada, Arizona.
Nevada, Arizona. Okay. The Boulder Dam includes an enormous star map. The architect who created that massive piece of architecture built into it a huge star map. He froze the stars above the dam and brought them down into a piece of architecture that he built into the dam. And the reason that this was done is very interesting, because he knew what the ancient Egyptians knew, that the positions of all the stars in the sky change very, very, very slowly down the ages as a result of a phenomenon called precession. Our planet, which is the viewing platform from which we observe all the stars in the sky, has a very slow wobble on its axis. And this wobble operates in a great cycle of 26,000 years. And as a result of this, the patterns and positions of all the stars in the skies change. And the reason that piece of architecture in the Boulder Dam was put there was so that any future civilization, if ours were to be destroyed, would be able to work out when the Boulder Dam was built. Because if they had a knowledge of astronomy, they could look at that star map built into the architecture, and they could work out from that when the star map and therefore the dam was made. And it's the same principle that we find at work in the monuments of Giza. Only in the case of the monuments at Giza, it's not just a matter of dating the monuments. It also helps us to get to grips with what they really mean. 2 constellations are represented on the ground at Giza.
All right, Graham, before we get there, let me understand a little bit better the science of the wobble effect.
Yes.
In other words, how we are able to measure, without 26,000 years of experience in one wobble cycle, what standard of measurement do we then use and apply toward being able to date these structures?
With very fine and precise observations, you can note that the wobble is underway over a relatively short number of years. Within a human lifetime of 72 years, this wobble on the axis of the Earth affects a 1-degree shift in the positions of the stars. Ancient cultures particularly observed it at the spring equinox. Now, the spring equinox is the time of the year when night and day are of exactly equal length, and it falls in our epoch on the 21st of March. And on the spring equinox, the sun rises perfectly due east of wherever you are situated on the planet. This is because our planet revolves around the sun, and there are 4 key moments in the year. The winter solstice and the summer solstice are the longest and shortest days of the year. On the summer solstice, the north pole of the Earth, the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, the north pole of the Earth points most directly at the sun because the Earth lies tilted on its axis. And on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, the 21st of December, the north pole of the Earth points most directly away from the sun. But at the equinoxes, spring and autumn equinoxes, the Earth lies broadside on to the sun in its orbit.
Then one could almost make a structure with a tiny pinpoint hole in it, and on the precise time of the precise day, measure the point where the sun hits?
Yes. You can, and many ancient structures target the rising point of the sun on the spring equinox. They point perfectly due east, and one of those structures is the Great Sphinx of Egypt. The Great Sphinx of Egypt is targeted perfectly due east. Its gaze sights the rising sun on the spring equinox. In the New World, if you go to Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, you will find an enormous pyramid, the Pyramid of Kukulkan, which was one of the names of Quetzalcoatl. I went into this at some length in my previous book, Fingerprints of the Gods. And this wonderful step pyramid at Chichen Itza is also an equinoctial marker because it is so set that on the day of the spring equinox, a wonderful effect of light and shadow is created, and a gigantic feathered serpent, which was the symbol of the civilizing deity Quetzalcoatl, is seen to undulate up and down the staircase of the pyramid. And therefore, even if you've lost touch with your calendar system, if there's been some great cataclysm and you've forgotten how to calculate your calendar, that monument will tell you when the spring equinox has occurred, and so also will the Sphinx. When the sun rises in direct alignment with the gaze of the Sphinx, it's the spring equinox. Now, for the ancients, they weren't just interested in the position that the sun rises along the horizon and it slowly changes north of east at the summer solstice, south of east at the winter solstice, perfectly due east at the spring equinox. They were also interested in the constellation, the group of stars that lay behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox. It's a wonderful, marvelous, magical coincidence of our cosmic environment that 12 great constellations lie in the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun, and these are the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Everybody knows about the zodiac. We all look at our horoscope every day.
So there are many points of measurement, not just one.
No. This is a very complex machine that we're looking at here. Think of it as a great clock, a great celestial clock operating in the heavens that we can tune into to find out where we're located in time. The point is this: because these 12 zodiacal constellations lie in the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun, it means that the sun will rise against the background of one of these constellations on the spring equinox.
Right.
The sun lies between the Earth and that constellation, and as the Earth rotates towards the sun, we see the sun rising against the background of that distant constellation. And for the ancients, the constellation that lay behind the sun on the spring equinox was considered to mark the age. That's why everybody's familiar with the notion of a new age and the notion of the dawning of the age of Aquarius. What this actually refers to is the phenomenon of precession of the equinoxes.
All right. Again, the only thing that I don't understand, now I understand the number of data points you have and follow on this, but how do you make a determination from one lifetime or even several that the period of wobble is 26,000 years?
Two ways. You must have very long-term observations which plot this change in the stellar positions against the rising point of the sun over hundreds and preferably over thousands of years. And those observations must be meticulously recorded and kept.
Have we done that?
And yes, we do it now, and we've been doing it certainly since the time of the Greeks. But the evidence that we present in our books, in Fingerprints of the Gods and the Message of the Sphinx, compellingly suggests that the ancient Egyptians were doing it and that they inherited this knowledge from an earlier lost civilization, that the whole knowledge of the precession is one of the most ancient sciences of mankind, and we find the values, the numbers that relate to this astronomical phenomenon recorded in the oldest myths of mankind. There were two great scholars, Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschent, who wrote a wonderful book in the 1960s called Hamlet's Mill. And Giorgio de Santillana was no lightweight. He was professor of the history of science at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But because the idea he put forward was so much at variance with orthodox scientific view, his work was never adopted by the scientific community. But what he argued, quite simply, was that precise, accurate measurements of the rate of the precession of the equinoxes were encoded in the most ancient myths of mankind. And curiously, these are all cataclysm myths. They're all myths that relate to the recurrent destructions of civilizations and of the earth, and of a recurrent flood and a huge global earthquake that strikes the planet. And incorporated in these myths are precise values for the rate of precession as good as our best astronomers can calculate today, a series of numbers that only make sense as references to the precession of the equinoxes and that are linked in these myths with astronomical symbolism of great intensity and cleverness. So there's powerful evidence in ancient myths that some ancient people, as yet unidentified by history, were observing this phenomenon as accurately and precisely as our scientists do today. And this evidence is also encoded in monuments all around the world, including the monuments of Egypt, and they speak to us in the language of precession. They speak to us in the language of precession, and they use it to draw our attention to a particular time to the positions and the exact patterns of the stars of two constellations, the constellation of Leo and the constellation of Orion, at a particular time, very distant in the past, and that time is 10,500 BC.
All right. Well, that's a lot of good scientific basis for saying what you say. What do the traditionalists do with that? Do they just dismiss it? Do they say interesting? How do they respond?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that Egyptologists are astronomically illiterate. Egyptology is a discipline that focuses on the dust at their feet, and they seek to evaluate Egyptian civilization by what they can dig out of the earth, by artifacts pulled out of the ground. And if it hasn't come out of the ground, then it doesn't fit in with their method of doing research, and therefore they ignore it. And they do not look at the stars, and they do not look at the skies. And this is very strange, because the ancient Egyptians themselves were avid star watchers, and their entire religion was focused around astronomy. Even the most orthodox of Egyptologists will accept that the high god of resurrection and rebirth in the ancient Egyptian system, the god Osiris, who was said to have brought civilization to Egypt in a remote epoch that they called the first time, Zeptepi in their language, that this god Osiris was seen to have a celestial image, a celestial twin, that the constellation of Orion was considered to be the image of Osiris in the sky. This is well known and well accepted, and yet Egyptologists have never considered the implications of it. And those implications are there, staring us in the face in 15 million tons of pyramids standing on the Giza Plateau in exactly the pattern of the three stars of Orion's belt, as they looked, and only as they looked, in 10,500 BC.
All right, Graham. Then the charge you're making is that our modern science is insufficiently, by comparison, integrated.
It is a science that is overly specialized.
Yes.
Egyptology makes the arrogant claim to be the sole body of knowledge capable of interpreting ancient Egyptian civilization to the modern world. And yet it is a body of knowledge, it's a system of knowledge that relies only on one method of investigation. Egyptologists do not use astronomy, and neither do they use geology. And geology is an important science when it comes to dating a very ancient site.
But I would have imagined that you would have tried to grab one of them and integrate and show him what you know and get his reaction.
We have tried to do that, and we've now got to the point where, in fact, we got to the point quite some time ago where we feel that it is pointless to do that. Because you can present this information again and again and again to Egyptologists, and they'll say, we're sorry, this does not coincide with what we know, therefore it must be wrong. Egyptology must be one of the few sciences in which, when new facts appear which challenge the prevailing theory, instead of the theory being changed, the facts are rejected. This is the way that Egyptologists do business, and this is what has happened in this case. But we're dealing here with an extraordinarily clever ancient people who went to great lengths to pass knowledge about themselves down to the future. And they used the language of the stars and the language of this phenomenon of precession so carefully and so cleverly that there can be no mistake about it. And I've presented this information, Robert Boval has presented this information, jointly we've presented this information to thousands of people, ordinary people, people like you and I, and they look at the information and their common sense tells them this has to be right. And that's why the name Egyptologist these days raises a giggle rather than a serious response, because the Egyptologists are still insisting that all of this is coincidence. And we'll lay out during the course of this evening the evidence that supports why this is not a coincidence and why it provides the key to a deep and mysterious secret of the past of humanity.
Suppose I were a modern contractor, and some very rich entity in Egypt came to me and said, I want to build this pyramid, and he gave me the design for one of the great pyramids. As a contractor, could I do it?
I don't think so. My co-author, Robert Boval, is a construction engineer. This was one of the reasons we teamed up, because we're able to bring different skills to bear on this problem. Robert is a construction engineer by training. He spent 20 years building enormous buildings in the Middle East. And his background was specifically as a setting-out engineer. And Robert, therefore, has looked in depth into the construction aspects of the Great Pyramid from a professional point of view. You know, Egyptologists have the view that the pyramid was built by teams of men hauling blocks of stone up ramps.
Yes.
But and that's the view that is presented in all the popular texts as though it were a fact. Again, there is no evidence for that view whatsoever. It's a simple fact of construction that human labor cannot haul blocks of stone weighing tens of tons each, and some of the blocks in the pyramid weigh more than 70 tons, and there are blocks in neighboring temples that weigh more than 200 tons, that human labor simply cannot haul blocks of stone up a ramp that has an incline steeper than 1 in 10. And to take a 1 in 10 ramp to the top of a 450-foot tall structure requires a ramp almost 1 mile in length, involving about 5 times as much material as is used in the Great Pyramid itself.
Wow.
And that material is to be found nowhere around the flat desert plateau on which the pyramids stand. And furthermore, the ramp itself would have had to have been made of blocks of stone as solid as those are used in the pyramid, otherwise it would have collapsed under its own weight. There's a great mystery regarding the construction of these monuments. In fact, Robert and I have put out a suggestion through various construction engineering journals in Britain to get a team of people together to try to really puzzle out how these monuments were built. We feel we have to dispense entirely with this Egyptological nonsense about slaves and gangs of men drawing blocks of stone up ramps a mile long, and we feel we have to look into this problem very seriously. I've climbed the Great Pyramid 3 times. It's illegal to climb it, but certain arrangements can be made, and I've climbed it 3 times, and on one of those occasions, which happened just after a great festival that was taking place in Egypt in 1995, the so-called the Eid that follows the holy month of Ramadan. There were 30,000 citizens of Cairo on the Giza Plateau having a picnic. They were having a holiday. And 200 or 300 of them decided to climb the Great Pyramid, even though the guards didn't want to do that. And myself and my wife Santa joined those climbers, and we climbed the Great Pyramid in broad daylight illegally with a lot of Egyptians also climbing it. And we discovered something very interesting.
Don't they frown on that?
Well, they do frown on it, and they said it was forbidden, but since hundreds of other people were doing it, it seemed a reasonable proposition for us to do it. And the interesting thing was this, that the climb itself is physically dangerous. I've climbed it on 2 other occasions when we climbed it alone without other people climbing it, and that was dangerous enough. But to climb it when hundreds of other people are climbing it is astonishingly dangerous. And the biggest danger of all is the other people who are passing you going up and down on the monument.
Domino effect.
A domino effect. You can literally get knocked off, and if you fall off this monument, then you're going to go all the way down to the bottom and you're going to die, and it's going to be very, very messy, strawberry jam. And the situation that I started to wonder about was this. The Egyptological scenario sees thousands of men swarming all over this monument.
I've seen the movies.
Yeah. Transporting blocks of stone weighing 2.5 tons each minimum. That's the lowest weight of a block of stone on the pyramid. Now, 2.5 tons is approximately, 4 family-sized automobiles in weight.
Big, yeah.
And the Egyptological view is that hundreds or thousands of men are gaily swarming all over the pyramid, hauling these blocks up and down.
Well, when you
I can tell you it's not possible. You can't even walk up and down it safely with just a couple of hundred people.
Graham, you can tell me that. When you tell them that
when I tell them that, they ignore it. This is why we feel that the Egyptological establishment has to be bypassed, that it is no longer relevant to this debate. It has shown that it is not intellectually competent to deal with the staggering challenges that these monuments represent. And as we show in the message of the Sphinx, Egyptology is also a deeply corrupt and dishonest discipline, which has been involved in most peculiar scams and scandals at the pyramids over the last 20 years, and which has not been honest with the public about certain matters that are taking place then, which has kept silent while the Sphinx and the 3 great pyramids have been hijacked by 2 powerful multimillionaires.
I take it you don't speak often at Egyptology conventions.
No, we do not speak at Egyptology conventions. But talking about conventions, we are inviting Egyptologists to attend a conference that's going to be held at the University of Delaware.
All right, Graham, hold on. We'll tell them all about it in a moment. We break here. We'll be right back. Back now to Graham Hancock. Graham, here's a question for you. Regarding the stones, which I think you've adequately shown could not be hauled up today intact, what about the theory that the stones instead were poured in place?
Yes, this is the theory of a man called Davidovits, and he put it forward in quite an interesting book published about 12 years ago. The stones were not poured intact. They contain ancient fossils of nummulites. So these are ancient sea creatures that dwelled in ancient oceans, out of which the limestone sediments were formed. And I'm afraid that the fact that these stones are made of nummulitic limestone rules out the possibility that this was some kind of concrete.
Those fossils would have been liquefied.
Yes. I mean, they wouldn't be found in a concrete. It's a cool theory. It's interesting. It's neat, but it just is not supported by the evidence. But it shows the questions that these incredible structures raise, that somebody would go to that length to develop a theory like that to try to explain this, because that would be a way of explaining how they got these big blocks up to such a height, is if they were pouring them into molds at that height from a liquid solution. But I'm afraid it just doesn't work, and the theory does not hold water, to coin a phrase.
Yes.
It's a slightly crazy theory, but it's not nearly as crazy as the orthodox theory which Egyptologists put forward about gangs of slaves hauling these things up ramps.
All right. So it couldn't have been poured. It couldn't have been hauled. How did they get there?
Well, I think that the most honest answer to that question is this: we just don't know. Let's be open-minded about this. Let's not approach this monument with fixed ideas. Let's approach it with open minds and questions.
So with all
minds, and let's try and resolve these questions. In order to do that, we first of all have to sweep away the dead hand of Egyptology and open the subject to rational debate from large numbers of people all around the world. People who bring different skills to bear on these monuments. Engineers, architects, philosophers, astronomers, geologists, people from all walks of life who seriously have the capacity to study these monuments need to be brought there and need to consider these monuments. Can I mention that conference in the University of Delaware?
Absolutely. Because
this could be a forum where this could be aired. We're issuing a challenge to Egyptologists to join us at that conference and to debate with us. It's at the University of Delaware. It's called Return to the Source, Rediscovering Lost Knowledge and Ancient Wisdom. I'll be speaking at that conference. So will John Anthony West, the most courageous and far-sighted American who's been working on the problem of the age of the Sphinx for the last 20 years. So will Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University, whose geological studies have shown that the Sphinx is thousands of years older than Egyptologists think it is. So will Robert Boval. So will Rand and Rose Flemath, whose work on Earth crust displacement I reported in Fingerprints of the Gods, and whose own book, When the Sky Fell, I would highly recommend to anybody who's interested in ancient catastrophes, and they'll be talking about Earth crust displacement and the mystery of the end of the last ice age. So will Colin Wilson from England, and many other independent thinkers who are working on the past of mankind. And this conference is taking place at the University of Delaware, 27, 28, and 29 September, and I can give out 2 numbers that people can call if they're interested in attending that conference.
Well, give them a little incentive. If I were an Egyptologist out there this morning, I'm not sure that I would walk into the arena you just described for fear of being ganged up on.
Well, we would like a gang of Egyptologists.
Well, all right, but
we would like dozens of them to come.
Graham, even if just one shows up, will he get a good fair debate?
Oh yes, very much so. We feel that fair debate is very important because we don't claim what they claim. We don't claim to be the sole source of knowledge on this subject. Our main role is to raise questions and to show that so far the questions have not been answered, but we think that the best way forward is through constructive debate and dialogue. And we'll all be presenting papers at that conference, but we would like Egyptologists to come and present papers, and we will set up a forum for debate where these issues can be openly aired in front of the public. And no, they certainly won't be ganged up on, and that's more than we can say for what they've done to us over the years.
There was a very interesting program that ran here in America. I don't know if it ran in Britain. Have you seen it? I'm sure you have. The Mysterious Origins of Man.
I appeared on it.
Well, that's right. You did.
I was most of the last half of that program. I was the guy that they filmed walking around in Stonehenge.
That's right.
And then they did a long interview with me. That was about the theme of my book, Fingerprints of the Gods.
Yes. Well,
which explored the possibility of a lost civilization all around the world. Yes, it was an excellent program, and interestingly enough, Bill Coty, who made that program, was deluged with hate mail by established academics. In fact, there was a campaign to try to get that program pulled off the air. I mean, America, I was always told, was supposed to be the home of freedom of speech. But when I read this ream of hate mail, which piles up about 3 feet tall, I suddenly realized that there's a whole movement in this country that does not want people to speak out.
Was it aired in Britain?
It has not been aired in Britain yet. I hope that it will be. The earlier film, also documentary, also presented by Charlton Heston, The Mystery of the Sphinx, in which John West and Robert Schoch's work on the vast antiquity of the Sphinx was first put before the public, was shown in Britain. They did a recut and re-edited version, and they added some new material to it, which, by the way, entirely supported the findings on the geology of the Sphinx.
Well, among the many findings in Mysterious Origins, there was the theory that the continents on the world have shifted, and what is the Arctic or Antarctic then becomes something else.
That's right. This is the theory of Earth crust displacement, and as I say, I would mention Randon Rose Flemath's book, When the Sky Fell, which is excellent work on that theory, and I also cover it at length in Fingerprints of the Gods. The theory was first developed by an American academic, an American historian of science called Professor Charles Hapgood, back in the early 1950s. And Charles Hapgood was supported at the time, and this is very important, as to the physics of his theory of Earth crust displacement by no less a figure than Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein was a man who knew his physics.
All right, give us the short version.
Okay, well, the short version is this. We've all heard of continental drift. We've all heard of plate tectonics. We all now know that the continents of the Earth move around on the surface of the Earth very, very slowly. Like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Look at West Africa and the east coast of South America. You can see that they once fitted together and that they've drifted apart. And this, by the way, this theory of continental drift was not accepted when it was first proposed in 1916. It was universally ridiculed, and it took more than 50 years for geologists to come to terms with the fact that it is a reality. But now that's the basis of all modern geology. The theory of Earth crust displacement is not contradictory with continental drift. It doesn't it does not contradict it. It actually works together with it. It suggests that from time to time there's another motion of the Earth's crust. In addition to the continents rearranging themselves in relation to one another, sometimes the entire outer crust of the Earth can shift in one piece around the body of the Earth, like the loose skin of an orange.
Kind of a continental little game you play with chairs where you run around. Everything shifts all at once.
Everything shifts at once. The whole thing moves at once. And when this happens, land that is in very cold parts of the planet, close to one or other of the poles, is cataclysmically shifted into warm parts of the planet, and land that is in warm parts of the planet is cataclysmically shifted into cold parts of the planet.
And what's the best evidence for this?
Well, the best evidence for this is the mystery of the last ice age. Again, we don't have time to go into vast detail here. All of it is in Fingerprints of the Gods. But the mystery of the last ice age is this. We all know there was an ice age. We all know that North America was covered with ice more than 2 miles thick. 6 million square miles of it, as far south as the Mississippi Delta, almost into the tropics. And this ice was stable for 100,000 years. And then suddenly, around 14,000 years ago, for reasons that no geologist has ever been able to explain, it all melted. Just within 1,000 or 2,000 years, the whole lot melted. The same thing happened in Northern Europe. The same quantity of ice was stable for the same length of time, and it all melted down within just a couple of thousand years. Sea levels went up by 400 feet. Hundreds of animal species, the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the saber-toothed tiger, hundreds of animal species were rendered extinct during this gigantic cataclysm that brought the last ice age to an end. And it was, by definition, a cataclysm. This was no slow-acting climate change. The question is, what caused the cataclysm? Earth crust displacement provides a very simple and elegant, clear answer, as Hapgood and Einstein showed back in 1953. It argues simply that we have masses of ice on our planet now. We have an ice age now at the North Pole and at the South Pole in the cold latitudes. And this ice is asymmetrically distributed around the poles. It isn't evenly distributed around the spin axis of the Earth. Look at Greenland, which is way off center to the rest of the ice. If you look at Antarctica, you'll find that the ice on the Antarctic plain, on the polar plain, is twice as thick as the ice on the Antarctic peninsula. It's uneven, it's unstable. And with our spinning planet, and it's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, and it's going around the sun at almost 70,000 miles an hour, with all these centrifugal and rotational forces, this huge, unstable mass of ice, not symmetrically distributed around the poles, creates an extremely deadly and dangerous situation. And at widely separated intervals, as it builds up to a particular level, as Einstein argued, it can exert sufficient thrust on the crust of the Earth, and we all live on the Earth's crust. It's just 30 miles thick, and it floats on a lubricating layer. It can exert sufficient thrust on the crust of the Earth to set the whole crust in motion, moving in one piece, moving very, very fast, creating enormous tidal waves, huge earthquakes across the whole planet, filling the air with volcanic dust, a darkness, a time of darkness, and all the myths of mankind speak of such an event, speak of black bituminous rain falling from the skies and huge floods, the flood of Noah. And it may just be that that's what these myths remember, the cataclysm that brought the last ice age to an end. And it may just be that all our memories of a great golden age in the story of mankind, of a high civilization that was destroyed in an enormous cataclysm long ago, it may just be that that is connected to this mystery.
All right. Graham, answer this. If that were to occur today,
yes,
with all our great cities and all our industry and all our population and all of the artifacts that are us today, if that cataclysm occurred today, what would be left of, or seen or found, of our great civilization after the shift?
Almost nothing. Almost nothing. The face of the Earth would be wiped clean. I have to stress it might not be Earth crust displacement, but there is some cataclysmic agent that strikes the Earth at regular and widely separated intervals of time. It may be a massive asteroid strike, a 10-mile wide nickel-iron asteroid incoming at cosmic speed would have the same effect. It could knock the Earth off its axis. It could create a kind of nuclear winter. Our civilization would be destroyed by that too. One of the things that my research has done to me when I was working on Fingerprints of the Gods was make me realize how fragile this beautiful blue planet of ours is, this garden of experience on which we all live, how fragile our cosmic environment makes our life on this Earth, and how easily we could lose it. The answer to your question is modern civilization, with all its much vaunted achievements, could be rubbed out in the blink of an eye, and there might just be a handful of survivors. And those survivors, I am sure, would do their best to keep the light of our knowledge burning and to pass it down to the future, just as the survivors of that great lost civilization of the past sought to do so. And I think that that's what we're seeing in the pyramids and the Sphinx of Giza, a memory device containing a time capsule of knowledge from a lost civilization of long, long ago, knowledge and wisdom that may be of vital importance to us today.
Behind that door in the Sphinx, does the library of that knowledge lie?
I think there is extraordinarily powerful evidence to suggest that this is so. If you were amongst the survivors of a high civilization and your civilization had been destroyed in an enormous cataclysm,
yes,
and you wanted somehow to keep the memory of your civilization preserved and to pass down the knowledge to the future, and you might particularly want to do that if you believed passionately in the reincarnation of the soul, by the way, because you might believe that you would come back. And the ancient Egyptians inherited a system of religious ideas that did believe in the reincarnation of the soul. You might want to pass that knowledge down to the future to wake yourself up at some distant time. If you had such knowledge, you wouldn't just put it in one place. you would, as it were, make a backup copy of your precious disk. And that's why we think that there is more than one place of refuge for this time capsule. That's why there is a deeply buried chamber in the bedrock beneath the Great Sphinx, and that's why there is a hidden chamber, the doorway of which has now been discovered inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt.
All right, this theory presupposes that that civilization understood what was going to occur.
It presupposes that they had very little time and very little warning, that there were a few survivors, and that they did do their best with the high knowledge they had preserved to create a sanctuary for that knowledge and to pass it down to the future. And they used many different techniques to do this. But one of the ways they did it was in creating these gigantic monuments and in concealing within them something of extraordinary importance. And clues as to what that might be are contained in the vast literature of the ancient Egyptians, because the ancient Egyptians were the inheritors of this civilization. They spoke of these survivors as the gods. They spoke of the time when the gods came to Egypt, far off in a remote epoch called the First Time. The god Osiris, the god of resurrection and rebirth, the god Thoth, the god of high magic and wisdom, the goddess Isis, Horus, the gods who came to Egypt bringing a knowledge of the divine origin of civilization with them and an understanding of how to live, of what life really means. And they encoded that in monuments, they hid it in chambers inside those monuments, and they passed it down through myth and scripture and culture, and it has reached us today, and it can still be understood.
What do we know about the contents of the secret areas of, for example, the Sphinx? What do we actually know about what's in there?
Well, one thing we know for sure is that licenses have been granted by the Egyptian government, by the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, involving a specific individual in that department, Zahi Hawass, who is the Director of Antiquities for the Giza Plateau. Licenses have been granted to 2 teams. Both of these teams are led by multimillionaires. One of them involves Florida State University. They are presently at the Great Sphinx of Egypt. They have $1 million worth of ground-penetrating radar and seismic equipment, and they are looking for chambers under the Sphinx. We already know and have known since 1993 that a large chamber exists at a depth of 25 feet beneath the front paws of the Sphinx.
All right,
Graham, that chamber was identified then.
All right, hold it right there. We'll be right back to you. Graham Hancock is my guest. Don't move. All right, once again, on his American tour here from Chicago is Graham Hancock. Graham, if they were to open up this secret chamber or series of chambers and they found this great library of information from the past, it would certainly smash all kinds of scientific paradigms, no question about it, but would also, would it not, or would it, smash a lot of religious paradigms?
Yes, there is a deep religious mystery involved in all of this, and it concerns the meaning of human life, and this is the matter that we address perhaps most centrally of all in the message of the Sphinx. The ancient Egyptians believed that their civilization had been bequeathed to them, that it was a legacy of beings that they called the gods. And the ancient Egyptians believed passionately in life after death. Indeed, for 3,000 years, they devoted their best minds to the consideration of no other issue than the issue of whether or not human consciousness survives death. And they believed that there was a way of living, a certain way of living in balance with the universe, which they called the law of Ma'at, the law of universal justice and cosmic harmony, which it was necessary for us to follow if we were to attain life after death. They believed that the soul was the immortal essence, and that the soul had been plunged into the material envelope, into the material form of the body, in order to undergo certain experiences that could only be had in the form of a human body. And indeed, they believed that a human body was a precious gift for the soul, but that we must not waste this gift. It's the the view, certainly, of most Orthodox Christianity today, that salvation is to be achieved only through faith, that blind faith alone is enough. We only have to believe, and then we will move on after death to heaven. This was not how the ancient Egyptians saw it. They believed passionately that life is an opportunity, a precious opportunity for the soul to learn and grow, and that our fundamental mission here is to acquire knowledge. Therefore, you might sum up their system by saying, not salvation through faith, but salvation through knowledge.
All right, but to be fair to the Christians, Graham, we are not without guidance. We have the Ten Commandments, we have the Bible, we have things that tell us how we should live to attain some sort of eternal position for the soul.
You know, I see a direct continuity between the ancient Egyptian wisdom tradition and the early, the pure, the original Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But something bad happened to Christianity at around the time of Constantine the Great, when the Roman Empire, in its jackboots, hijacked that religion and turned it into a religion that in later times would burn people at the stake for using their minds. Burn people like Giordano Bruno at the stake in the year 1600. Why? Because he said there is life on other planets. Because he said the universe is filled with life, and it doesn't make sense that our Earth is the only place in the whole universe with life on it. For saying that, and for saying that the Earth revolved around the sun, which was a simple observation that had been made by Copernicus and that Giordano Bruno supported, this courageous man was burned at the stake by Christians. Christianity, through its hijacking by the Roman Empire and through the bureaucratic changes that were instituted in it at that time, became a religion of suppression of knowledge, in which knowledge was considered not to be a brilliant gift, but a danger, and anyone who sought after knowledge was seen as a threat to Christianity.
Indeed, the holding of books was a crime punishable by being burned, I think.
Indeed it was, and it was Christians, when they came to the New World, so-called Christians, who heaped up the manuscripts of the Maya, of that wonderfully civilized people of Mexico, of Central America, the Maya, heaped them up into piles 30 feet high and burned them in bonfires, thus wiping clean the memory banks of mankind in Central America, and who did the same thing in South America, destroying human knowledge simply because they felt that it conflicted with the teachings of the Christian faith, or should I say the Christian bureaucracy, because as I said a moment ago, if we go back to true and original Christianity, the beginning of this religion, the Gnostic Christianity, the Hermetic Christianity, we find a religion that's totally different, and that emphasizes the need to acquire knowledge, to use this wonderful intellect that God gave us, to use our minds, not to vegetate and blindly accept dogma from people who call themselves priests, but to use our minds and our initiative and our instinct and our intuition. And this was the central concept of the ancient Egyptian religion. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the equipped spirit, that the purpose of life was to perfect the soul, to perfect consciousness, to become an equipped spirit, and that the equipped spirit would then have the ability to navigate eternity, freely, like a bird.
All right, wonderful. So suppose these millionaires, with all their equipment, and then Graham Hancock and others, go over there and begin to acquire this knowledge. Wouldn't the religious capitals and power centers of the world, if not burning you at the stake, Graham, do so in sort of a modern way? In other words, that knowledge would never, ever, ever see the light of day.
I'll answer that question in a moment. I want to say something a little further first, which is it's important that listeners understand about this ancient Egyptian religious system and about why it offers something of extraordinary importance to the modern world, and about why indeed it would be suppressed by the powers that be.
Mm-hmm.
The ancient Egyptians spoke of a special region of the sky, and they called that region of the sky the Duat. It's spelled D-U-A-T when you transcribe it into our alphabet. And this region of the sky consisted of two principal constellations: the constellation of Leo, which I spoke of earlier,
correct,
and the constellation of Orion, which I spoke of earlier. On either side of the Milky Way, that the ancient Egyptians called the winding waterway. And what we're showing in the message of the Sphinx is that it is this region of the sky, this incredibly important region of the sky, through which the ancient Egyptians believed that the souls of the dead must journey after death and must undergo certain trials and ordeals for which their life was supposed to have prepared them. It is this region of the sky that is built on the ground at Giza, with the Sphinx replicating the constellation of Leo, and with the three great pyramids representing the three stars of Orion's belt. And the ancient text, for example, the Book of What is in the Duat, which is inscribed on the walls of tombs in the Valley of the Kings in Upper Egypt, tells the initiate to do this. It says to the initiate, build on the ground a perfect copy of the hidden circle of the Duat and know it, and through that knowledge you may hope for eternity. And we think that's what they did. The hidden circle of the Duat is a reference to these skies, this area of the sky hidden in time, hidden in the sky of 10,500 BC. And it is that sky that is built on the ground in the form of the Great Sphinx and the three great pyramids, with the Milky Way represented by the River Nile.
Let me see if I'm grasping this, Graham. They felt that that was the pathway the soul would take.
Yes.
In what manner would these precisely built structures aid the soul? In other words, is it sort of a...
They were a place of initiation. They were a place of preparation. They were a place in which the individual, the initiate, was immersed in darkness, in an underground labyrinth of corridors and passageways, to find his way, or her way, finally, to a place where an experience, where an encounter with a physical object, with physical records, with the books of the wisdom God's thought, as all the ancient texts tell us, an encounter would take place, and there knowledge would be revealed to the initiate that would be the knowledge necessary to pass safely through the Duat after death. In other words, the ancient Egyptians believed that on death, unless one were properly prepared, the soul confronted a moment of terror and confusion and disorientation. And what they sought to do through the course of their lives was to prepare themselves for that moment so that they would be alert and awake and aware and ready to confront the challenges and the judgment that took place in the Duat, because these were a people who believed that there was a reckoning and that everything we do in life is counted up, and that at the end of life, as we journey through the Duat, we confront that reckoning in a scene that appears painted on tomb walls that is called the judgment scene. But when you translate the ancient Egyptian text exactly, they called this scene the weighing of words. And what you see is the soul in the judgment hall of Osiris, in one of these divisions of this strange parallel universe called the Duat. And there the soul confronts the great scales. And on the scales, in one pan is weighed the heart of the soul, which symbolizes its immortal essence. And on the other is weighed the feather of truth. And the feather of truth must balance the heart. And if the heart is heavy with sin, or if the individual has wasted his or her life and never used it to accumulate experience and overcome challenges and difficulties, but just idled life away,
yes,
then the individual would face what they called the second death. And this was the ultimate end. Never, ever to live again, never to come back, never to have the opportunity to perfect oneself, but simply to be annihilated and never live again. On the other hand, if life had been lived well, and if the spirit were equipped, then it would pass on into eternity, or at any rate be reborn and have an opportunity to live and learn those lessons again. And the system of monuments on the Giza Plateau, we have no doubt, we set out the evidence in depth in the message of the Sphinx, but the system of monuments on the Giza Plateau was built to reflect the skies of 10,500 BC, to reflect the Duat region of the sky, to be a place of preparation and initiation, and to encapsulate and encode the knowledge of divine origin and the meaning of life that the gods brought to Egypt, as all the ancient Egyptian texts tell us.
How far are the Egyptians going to let us go? The electronics is going to go over there and look as hard as it can look. What about us going in?
Well, the biggest problem is human nature itself, and the biggest problem is the motives of the individuals who are presently working at this site. This story goes back to 1991 in its most recent incarnation, when John Anthony West, a very courageous man, for 20 years, John West has been trying to draw the attention of Egyptologists to the anomalous weathering patterns on the Sphinx, to the fact that the Sphinx was clearly exposed to thousands of years of heavy rainfall after it was carved. Finally, in 1991, he got Professor Robert Schoch of Boston University, a leading geologist, to join him, and subsequently their findings have been supported by hundreds of geologists around the world that the Sphinx is vastly older than 2500 BC because it was carved when the Sahara Desert was still green at the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago. But that team also conducted seismic surveys around the Sphinx, and their seismic equipment identified a large, perfectly rectangular chamber buried in the bedrock at a depth of about 25 feet beneath the front paws of the Sphinx. As soon as they'd revealed this information to the public, they were kicked off the site by the Egyptian authorities, and by a particular individual whose name I mentioned before, Zahi Hawass, who is the head of the Egyptian of the Antiquities Organization with responsibility for the pyramids and the Sphinx, and they have never been allowed to return to continue their work. In the same year, in 1993, a German robotics engineer, Rudolf Gantenbrink, as I mentioned earlier, used a robot to explore the so-called southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid,
right,
and after a journey of 200 feet, discovered a door at the end of that shaft, and the same thing precisely happened to him. He released the information to the public, and he was kicked off the site and has never been allowed to return to continue his work. In 1995, realizing that he would never be allowed to come back, he offered to donate his robot to the Egyptian authorities and to train an Egyptian technician to do the job. And they wrote back to him and they said, "We're sorry, Mr. Gantenbrink, thank you for your kind offer, but we're much too busy at the moment, please go away." And there the situation rested for some time.
And
just
now?
This year, as we expose in the new book and as we've been trying to draw public attention to, a scandal has begun to unfold. Two multimillionaires, one of them American, one of them Canadian, working through, in the case of the Sphinx, the Florida State University, because you need to have a university on your side in order to get a license from the Egyptian authorities, have been granted concessions, one team to open the chamber under the Sphinx and to search for more, and the other team to open the chamber inside the pyramid. And this work is happening now, and greed and ego and a private agenda and absolute secrecy surround this investigation. Robert Boval and myself were invited by the team working at the Sphinx to participate in their project. And this is a project that has been stolen from the original discoverer, John Anthony West. I mean, literally taken out of his hands by wealthy individuals and taken over by them. And these individuals asked myself and Robert to be part of their team because of our astronomical work, which pinpoints another chamber under the Sphinx. But they imposed two conditions on us. One was that we should write a letter condemning John Anthony West. This is like the Spanish Inquisition. Mm-hmm. And the other was that we should undertake to maintain absolute secrecy and not to reveal to the public anything that was found until the multimillionaire leading the team decided that he was prepared to reveal that information to the public. We rejected these absurd and outrageous conditions, and we're campaigning for an independent inquiry to be undertaken as to what on earth is going on at these monuments.
All right, the obvious question is, have they made a deal, a very specific deal with the Egyptian government regarding the flow of information?
Well, it's certainly the case that a deal has been made with somebody. The central figure who appears in both these projects is Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian Antiquities Authority's official with responsibility for the pyramids and the Sphinx. He has been involved in both of them. The team working at the Sphinx have been making a video film of what they've been doing. In fact, they've had a professional film crew from Los Angeles with them, and the initial filming was done in December last year, and the initial filming alone cost $100,000. And we have been leaked a 7-minute video cassette that was made by this team, and the video cassette is most bizarre. It appears to be a promotional, in fact, when it was sent to us, they said it was a promotional video cassette. It appears to be a promotional video cassette designed to hook a major U.S. television network into some kind of ghastly stage, live, televised opening of a chamber under the Sphinx at very large expense. And appearing in this video cassette, very oddly, because of something that the narrator of the video text says, the video cassette says. I'll tell you what he says. He speaks of an American psychic called Edgar Cayce,
yes, who
prophesied that the Hall of Records of the lost civilization of Atlantis would be discovered under the Sphinx in 1996. Appearing on this video, opening the video, in fact, is none other than our friend Zahi Hawass, this Egyptian official whose name I've been mentioning again and again, who's the man who controls the pyramids and the Sphinx, and who previously has spoken out very insultingly against Edgar Cayce, and has condemned any notion that the Sphinx might have been built by survivors of Atlantis. And yet, mysteriously, this individual appears on this film, entering a tunnel at the rear of the Sphinx, which cuts down towards a chamber that we've identified with our astronomical work, and who invites the viewer to follow him down into this tunnel. And he says, tonight, live on your television screens, we will open for the first time this tunnel that has never been opened before. What is going on here is truly extraordinary. This is not decent science. This is not work in which the public can expect to be told the truth. Some kind of hidden agenda is operating behind the scenes. Millions of dollars are involved in it, and we're not getting the straight scoop.
Brother. So you think there is a very public avenue they're going to follow altogether, too public and not scientific enough, and a very private and separate agenda?
Yes. The public avenue will come when it suits them to go public with the information. And in the meantime, they have absolute control and absolute secrecy over everything that they are doing. And what concerns us about this is whether, when they do finally choose to reveal information to the public, anything will be believed at all. The way that this research should be done from the beginning is under full public scrutiny, with no secrecy. It should be done completely out in the open, because these monuments are a legacy of mankind. And to have this secrecy going on, to have people being actually sworn to secrecy and not allowed to speak to anybody about what's happening there, the team who are working at the Sphinx have now been instructed not to speak to me or to Robert Bauval or John Anthony West or any of the others of us who are investigating this matter. To have this kind of secrecy going on, and yet at the same time to have some kind of carnival event being arranged for television in the next few months.
I think I get the picture, Graham. Hold on. We'll be right back to you. My guest is Graham Hancock. He'll be right back. This is CDC.
Bizarre stories are the order of the day on Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM. This caller says his elderly sister is being visited by extraterrestrials.
It started one night about 2 months ago. She got in bed and something grabbed her by the foot.
I hate these kinds of stories.
Yeah. She pulled her foot back and they grabbed her foot again and stuck a needle in it.
I really hate those stories.
Yeah. And they pulled the covers back and sprayed the back of her head and stuck a needle in her head.
Then she ran to get her brother to help.
He thought she was imagining it, so he went and laid on her bed. And they sat on its feet.
They sat on its feet?
Yeah. So he kicked them off. But they don't seem to bother him as much. She's kind of gotten used to them now. They put a probe up her nose. But they've gotten to where they'll sleep on the bed with her.
Join Art Bell all night, overnight on Coast to Coast AM.
If that was me, I would be wanting to talk to an exorcist right now. We have been carefully laying out the science and the theory behind the incredible structures known as the pyramids, and, of course, the Sphinx. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Ark of the Covenant as well. But I've got a sort of overall question for you, Graham, and we do have to get to the phones eventually here, and that question is, were they to open this up, and there was no interference, no secret deals, and we got the knowledge as it came out, what do you imagine, Graham, what do you imagine is in that material?
hundreds of references that have come down to us in known Egyptian texts, in the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, in the so-called pyramid texts that were carved on the walls of later pyramids, not the pyramids of Giza, but pyramids from about 2300 BC at Saqqara, south of Giza, the Book of what is in the Duat, the coffin texts, and others of these amazing ancient Egyptian funerary and rebirth texts tell us what will be found there. They tell us that it's an extraordinary secret, that it concerns the wisdom of the gods Thoth and Osiris. And Thoth was the god of high magic and wisdom. They called him the counter of the stars. He was known in later times by the Greeks as Hermes. And a tradition passes down from the earliest times in ancient Egypt up to the present day, a tradition that was somehow picked out of the ether by that American psychic Edgar Cayce, who spoke of the Hall of Records of Atlantis concealed under the Sphinx. And I've been speaking, by the way, of this American multimillionaire who's financing this so-called project at the Sphinx at the moment involving Florida State University. I have to tell you that this individual is a life member of the Association of Research and Enlightenment, which is the Edgar Cayce organization. And while I want to stress that I regard Edgar Cayce with the highest respect, and also the Association for Research and Enlightenment with the highest respect, but that doesn't mean that, like any other organization, it doesn't have a few members who are loose cannons, particularly if they've got $100 million in the bank. This Edgar Cayce, I'm going to tell you what the Egyptian texts tell us is in those chambers, but I need to just give a bit more background first.
All right.
This Edgar Cayce organization, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, is a psychic organization, and normally Egyptologists and psychics mix about as well as polecats and chickens. Egyptologists deride psychics and they insult them and they claim that they're cranks and kooks and all of that kind of stuff. We were interested to discover that the leading Egyptological expert on the Great Sphinx, a man who is the voice of orthodoxy on the Great Sphinx, a man who has spoken out in many public fora insisting that the Great Sphinx was built in 2500 BC, the orthodox view, yes, and that it was simply a great statue to aggrandize the ego of a pharaoh called Khafre, a man whose work has been regularly published in National Geographic magazine, who's a pillar of the establishment, a professor at the Oriental Institute in the University of Chicago, Professor Mark Lehner. We were astonished to discover that his education at the American University in Cairo was paid for by the Edgar Cayce organization and by friends of the Edgar Cayce organization, including certain millionaires, and that for many years after he graduated from the American University in Cairo, he continued having exclusive access to the Sphinx to carry out research projects financed by the Edgar Cayce organization and by the friends of the Edgar Cayce organization. Mark Lehner has admitted this to us, and we've published in the Message of the Sphinx an appendix, a letter from him, in which he admits this connection to us. And this is why we feel that the independent inquiry that is desperately needed into what is going on at the Sphinx and inside the Great Pyramid cannot be carried out by Egyptologists. We think that the whole discipline of Egyptology is compromised by what has been happening at the pyramids and at the Sphinx, and that the independent inquiry needs to be conducted perhaps best of all by the world's media. And in fact, we find that this compromising of Egyptology goes back a very long way, that we, in part of our book, in part 2 of the Message of the Sphinx, we look at Egyptology over the last 100 years and how it has systematically neglected and ignored crucial aspects of the Pyramid of the Sphinx, and sometimes even misinformed the public about what is happening there. For example, certain mysterious relics were found inside the shafts of the Great Pyramid, and this was never publicly announced. They were hidden away in a drawer in the British Museum until we unearthed them, and my colleague Robert Boval was instrumental in that. An iron plate was discovered at the end of the mouth of the southern shaft of the so-called King's Chamber, a shaft that targets the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. This iron plate was discovered in 1837, deeply embedded in the masonry of the Great Pyramid and clearly contemporary with the building of the pyramid. Egyptologists refused to accept that it could be contemporary because it doesn't fit their paradigm of history. They believe that the Iron Age started in Egypt in 600 BC, and therefore an iron plate in a monument that is at least 4,500 years old doesn't fit their theory. So instead of making public knowledge about this mysterious discovery, they hid it away in a drawer in the British Museum, from which Robert and I unearthed it in 1993. There has been a systematic dishonesty about these monuments going on for a very long time, and we think that the entire discipline of Egyptology is compromised and thoroughly discredited by the way that it has handled research at this site. And this unfortunately comes to a head with this most important matter of the hidden chamber under the Great Sphinx and the hidden chamber inside the Great Pyramid. Just to close this story, I'll quote you from a recorded telephone interview that I did with the millionaire who's financing the other project. He's a Canadian millionaire, and he's financing the opening of the door at the end of the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber.
Yes.
And he said to me, "I'm working with a private guy who is a personal friend of Hawass." And that's that Zahi Hawass again.
Right.
And we are absolutely going to drum this thing to death. Whatever the event we are going to stage, it will be televised live. And he says that they're looking to raise $10 million from the United States television networks for this so-called live opening of the door. In other words, the Great Pyramid, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, and perhaps its last and greatest secret, the contents of a hidden chamber, has been sold to the highest bidder. And this monument, the research in this monument has been delayed for 3 years for reasons of human greed and ego.
Okay, having said that, Graham, at the same time, you called for media coverage.
Yes, we're calling for media coverage, but the research must be done openly and honestly. It can't be done. There must be no commercialization. There must be no hidden agenda. There must be no secrecy. Do you think a network is going to put $10 million into the opening of a door that they have no idea what is behind it? Wouldn't that be the ultimate anticlimax, the anticlimax of the century, if that door were opened and there was nothing behind it? They want to look behind there first. The secrecy that surrounds the research that is going on at the Great Pyramid and the Great Sphinx at the moment is so intense that nobody knows what's going on. These teams have exclusive access to these two matters. They are doing what they like with these monuments. The entry fee is large sums of money, and the public are not being told what is happening there. And this is what we're outraged about, and this is why we're campaigning for this work to be stopped dead in its tracks. The Egyptian government needs to be embarrassed into stopping this work. There needs to be a pause, and then new research needs to be started. A project has been proposed through Boston University and Princeton, and this project would be done in a scientific manner with full public scrutiny. And so far, this project has been entirely ignored by the Egyptian authorities, and we wonder why.
All right, Graham, if there is this great staged commercial opening, do you think it will be the first opening, or will there be a bit of a private pre-opening and extraction?
I think it's certain that there'll be a private pre-opening.
Yes.
And I think it's possible that the mine will be salted. This is perfectly possible under the present circumstances, and nobody will ever know the truth if these projects are allowed to continue in the present manner. This is what is so disturbing about this.
That's a very serious charge. The mine would be salted.
It is possible that the mine will be salted.
And
individual who, it is possible. I'm saying it's possible that it will be salted because of the secrecy.
Yes, and what would you imagine they would salt it with?
Well, let me tell you that Zahi Hawass, the individual who has been involved in granting these licenses, recently made an announcement in the Egyptian press concerning the work that is being done around the Sphinx and the secret tunnels under the Pyramid Plateau. And he said that he expected them to find a large statue of the pharaoh Khafre there. The pharaoh who is favored by Egyptologists.
So you think it's being chiseled out as we speak?
Well, I'll leave it to our listeners to make up their own minds on this matter. But unfortunately, the situation has just become so messed up by all these worst aspects of human nature, by greed and ego and secrecy and power, that we aren't going to get the truth unless the work is stopped and the project is started again in a clean and honest and open manner.
All right. There are many people who think that, for example, Rome, the Pope, has knowledge generally of what will be found, what is in there, what secrets are in there, some sort of general knowledge, and this has been passed from Pope to Pope to Pope. Is that possible?
Well, let me tell you what the ancient Egyptians said. They referred, as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of times to a great secret concealed there. And there was a kind of initiate's quest that appears to have been undertaken by the pharaohs themselves, by the Horus kings of ancient Egypt, for this great secret. Mm-hmm. They spoke of the books of Thoth, the books of the ancient Egyptian wisdom god. And can I read you a couple of short passages from the ancient text?
Fire away.
In one of these, Thoth is known by his Greek name, Hermes. Such was all-knowing Hermes, who saw all things, and seeing understood, and understanding had the power both to disclose and to give explanation. For what he knew he graved on stone, yet though he graved them onto stone, he hid them mostly. The sacred symbols of the cosmic elements he hid away, hard by the secrets of Osiris, keeping sure silence that every younger age of cosmic time might seek for them. And in another passage, Thoth, the god of wisdom, speaks of his holy books that he has concealed at Giza, and he says, O holy books, who have been made by my immortal hands, by incorruption's magic spells, free from decay, throughout eternity remain, and incorrupt from time, become unseeable, unfindable, for everyone whose foot shall tread the plains of this land, until old heaven doth bring forth meet instruments for you. What instruments, we wonder, might lead to the recovery of unseeable and unfindable secrets concealed at Giza? Could it be ground-penetrating radar, seismic equipment, a robot with a video camera mounted on the front of it? The last passage that I'll read you is just 3 lines long, and it speaks of the ancient name by which Giza was known, which was Rostau. And Rostau means, and it's very mysterious, it means gateway to the stars. This is the sealed thing which is in darkness with fire about it, which contains the emanation of Osiris, and it is put in Rostau. It has been hidden since it fell from him, and it is what came down from him onto the desert of sand. It means that what belonged to him was put in Rostau. Hundreds of references in the ancient Egyptian texts speak of a great secret concerning the divine origins of their civilization, written records that refer to that time and that refer to the mystery of the meaning of life and of life after death associated with the god Osiris. I think that what's hidden there is a matter of extraordinary importance for mankind today, and that's why I feel so passionately and so strongly about what is happening at that site.
I understand. A contemporary caveat for you. Did you see a movie called Stargate?
Yes, indeed. I saw Stargate.
Good.
And I saw the first 12 minutes of Stargate, which are about the only minutes of the film that are really any good. And in those 12 minutes, the researchers of that film had clearly got into the latest work because they spoke of the connection with the Orion correlation.
Exactly.
And they spoke of the geological weathering of the Sphinx. So that film, in a way, was up to date. And we find it interesting that they called the film Stargate because not many people know that Rostau, the ancient name for Giza, does literally mean gateway to the stars.
That was going to be my question, Graham. Might, along with whatever else may be there, might there in effect be a gateway?
We think that this is precisely what the monuments are. They are a gateway to the stars. They are a gateway to this region of the heavens that the ancient Egyptians called the Duat. They're an interface between this material life and the life beyond death that the ancient Egyptians believed was experienced in that region of the sky through which the soul had to dwell, to travel, a physical interface. Extraordinary monuments with a transformatory capacity on the human mind that can lift the mind out of the body, lift spirit out of matter, help us to realize what we really are. Yes, they are a gateway to the stars.
Should we have such a thing, Graham?
Well, we do have such a thing, and it was created with extraordinary intelligence and skill, and it was created for a purpose. And those chambers, so cleverly and cunningly concealed beneath the Sphinx and inside the Great Pyramid, were meant to be found, so that every younger age of cosmic time might seek for them, as the ancient texts say.
Right,
they were meant to be found.
Right, let me rephrase the question. Do you believe we're ready to find them?
I think if there were ever a time when mankind needed this wisdom that is hidden there, this legacy that the ancient Egyptians themselves inherited, this ancient legacy of wisdom and knowledge, that time is now, because we live in a time of darkness. And a power of evil is afoot in the world, which is trying to persuade all of us that life has no meaning. And that's why there's so much viciousness and cruelty and hateful behavior in the world today. We need this knowledge. We need this wisdom now. And it is there, and people foresaw this long ago.
All right, Graham, hold on. It sounds to me a lot like what I call the quickening, economically, politically, socially. Every single avenue of human endeavor that you can measure these days is worsening, quickening, becoming harder to deal with, harder to understand. Life these days means increasingly less as events begin to move faster and faster and faster. Graham Hancock, back in a moment. I'm Art Bell, and this is CBC. All right, back now to Graham Hancock. Graham, are you there?
Yes, I'm still here, fading fast. It's getting close to 4 in the morning here, and I've got to get up in about 2 hours, but I'm still here.
Oh, my. All right, Graham. So all this incredible information may be below the Sphinx, may be contained yet in the pyramids. I've got to ask you about the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
You believe that it is real, it is locatable.
My first book in this series of books, and they are a series of books during which I have personally developed as a researcher, and during which I've undergone transformatory experiences that have changed my whole way of looking on life. My first book that plunged me into this huge area of mystery was The Sign and the Seal. Right. Before that, I was a correspondent for The Economist. I was a hard-edged journalist. I was interested in politics, wars, famine, economics, that kind of stuff. And I was an investigative researcher, and just by the sheerest luck, by luck in my life, I came across the Ethiopian claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant. And this claim led me into the realm of mystery that brought me to the pyramids, and finally to this story that we tell in the Message of the Sphinx, and that I preceded with Fingerprints of the Gods. But the Ark of the Covenant was the beginning of it all for me. Right. And in order to follow up the Ethiopian claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant, I had to try to understand what this mysterious object really is. I had to go into all the ancient accounts that speak of it, the accounts in the Bible and many, many accounts outside the Bible. There are more than 200 references to the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible before the time of Solomon. And after the time of Solomon, it is almost never spoken of again. And all the references to the Ark describe a most extraordinary and mysterious object.
Would you, if you could, open it?
No, I would not. I would not. I have studied this matter very closely. I began to wonder what the Ark is, what it really is. When I came at last at the end of my long journey, which brought me through Egypt, across the deserts of the Sudan during the Ethiopian Civil War in 1991, and finally up into the highlands of Ethiopia to the city of Aksum, and at last to the monastery at the heart of which stands the sanctuary chapel in which the Ethiopians claim that the Ark of the Covenant is kept, I was determined to get inside that chapel and see the Ark. And then I encountered the guardian of the Ark, a single, pure, and holy monk whose responsibility it is to go before this object every day, to burn incense before it, and to offer prayer before it. And he spoke to me about the Ark, and the things that he told me made me quite certain that I didn't want to get inside. And even if I had wanted to go inside, I would never have been allowed. The city of Aksum stands at the heart of the Tigrayan rebellion. The biggest standing army in Africa, the tyrannical dictatorial army of the former dictator of Ethiopia, Mengistu Haile Mariam, was overthrown by the people of Tigray. And at the heart of the province of Tigray is the sacred city of Aksum, and it's a city which is guarded by fierce and independent people, and they would never allow anybody to get into that chapel on pain of death.
I understand, but I want to know.
But if I could get in there, would I open it? No.
And why not?
I would not open the Ark.
Why not?
For two reasons. Firstly, because of the aura of sanctity and mystery that attaches to it, and in some matters I do not think we should dabble. And secondly, because this object, in all the descriptions, it comes across as immensely deadly, physically dangerous. I have now spoken, I've had the opportunity to speak with a series of guardians of the Ark in Aksum. They have a very short lifespan. Once they are appointed to this position, they rapidly become sick. They develop cataracts over their eyes. One of them, Tesfa Miriam, the one I interviewed at the end of The Sign and the Seal, Gebra Mikhael, who I spoke to in 1991, died a few months later. His position was taken by another monk called Tesfa Miriam, and I met Tesfa Miriam on 3 occasions over a 6-month period, and we visibly saw him shrink in size, and we saw the cataracts milk over his eyes and cover his eyes. And we asked him why, what was doing this to him. And he said, it's the Ark. It's the Ark of the Covenant that is doing this to me. We asked him how he felt when he'd first gone into its presence. He said, I trembled with fear, and I tremble still. And I said, why? Why do you tremble? And he just looked at me straight and level in the eyes, and he said to me, the Ark is a thing of fire. And all the ancient traditions speak of it as precisely that, an instrument of enormous power and deadly danger. I think it's another one of these legacies of a great lost civilization, a legacy of a science and a knowledge that we do not understand today. I found that there are descriptions of identical objects in ancient Egyptian tradition. One, for example, is called the Box of Ra, and Ra was the ancient Egyptian sun god. This was a golden box just like the Ark, and it was said to contain a series of objects, including a rod or a staff, which is also said to be inside the Ark. It was apparently hidden away in a fortress on the eastern frontier of Egypt, and thousands of years after the time of Ra, an Egyptian pharaoh sought to open it, and as they lifted open the lid of this box, a bolt of fiery energy shot forth from it, and everybody who stood around it was killed. Precisely the same thing happened again and again with the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible.
How are you sure, Graham, that going through that metal door at the Sphinx wouldn't leave one roughly the same way?
Because what is concealed there was meant to be found. Because these were repositories of records and traditions, not instruments of war and death. The Ark of the Covenant, in every description that has survived of it, sounds like an instrument that was designed to kill people. And that's what the Israelites used it for. That's what Moses and the Israelites used it for when they traveled to the Promised Land, when they knocked down the walls of Jericho with it. That's what it did to the Philistines when they briefly captured it. The Bible says the hand of God lay heavy upon the Philistines. This was an instrument designed to do damage and harm.
Indeed. Well, yes, but
the chambers under the Sphinx and the chamber inside the Great Pyramid were designed to contain records and tradition and information and secrets and wisdom. And these were intended to be found. You do not build a 200-foot-long shaft, 8 inches wide and 8 inches high, rising at an angle of 39 degrees through a 6-million-ton monument, leading to a door with 2 handles, unless it is your intention that at some time, at the right time, when the time is right, that door should be opened.
All right. Quickly, the work of Mr. Hoagland regarding the monuments of Mars and how it relates to what we have here on Earth that we've been talking about tonight.
Well, the first point to make is that what we have here with the monuments of Mars is a testable hypothesis, and testable hypotheses are very desirable in science. Science rests on the notion of ideas that can be tested out, and this is an idea par excellence that can be tested out. We do not need to speculate any longer about what those curious forms and patterns on the surface of Mars are, which appear to be a group of pyramids and the face of an enormous Sphinx about a mile long, gazing straight up at outer space. These first were shown in photographs taken in 1976 by the Voyager mission.
Yes.
And there is a possibility that the photographs are simply revealing tricks of light and accidents of erosion, and this is the NASA story. This is what NASA says. It's possible. Let's face it. It's possible that that's what these things are, but it's also possible that they're artificial. And Richard Hoagland has put together an enormous amount of evidence which compellingly suggests that they are artificial. Now, I don't want to speculate about it. I want the work to be done. I want the research to be done. I want, and I think the American public would want, NASA to make sure that the two vehicles being launched and sent to Mars this year, one an orbiter and one a lander, take a close look at that area on the surface of Mars where these structures appear. These spacecraft are being financed by American public money. They belong to the American public. They do not belong to a few bureaucrats with fixed and rigid ideas. And I think the American public, in their masses, in their millions and tens of millions, would wholeheartedly endorse the use of these vehicles to closely re-photograph those structures on Mars, and the use of the lander to land at that point, which is called Cydonia, and to find out precisely what these things are. If they turn out to be just tricks of light and erosion, then the experiment will still have been worthwhile, and we can draw a line under the matter and forget about it. But my goodness, if they turn out to be artificial structures, then everything changes. Our whole view of life in the solar system changes. Another great mystery opens up. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what human curiosity and intelligence are for. We're supposed to be finding out what we are, why we're here, our place in the universe. And we should be looking with urgency and intelligence and curiosity. We should be looking with interest at these things and finding out what they are. And it stuns me that the bureaucrats at NASA have never allowed this further work to be done. I think it's extraordinary. I think it's bizarre. I'm not surprised that all manner of conspiracy theories have grown up around this. It's an outrageous situation. These monuments should definitely be studied if they are monuments. Let's find out what they are.
Richard has renamed his mission, the Enterprise mission, to Boldly Go Where Someone Has Gone Before.
Yes.
And that would make sense. Now,
Richard and I find common ground not just on the matter of suppression of knowledge.
Yes.
At the Giza site and in the issue of the monuments of Mars, but also in another intriguing possibility, that we may not be looking at the work of extraterrestrials here. We may be looking at a fingerprint of a distant, lost human civilization. Yes. That an earlier human civilization may have made the climb to the level that we have now reached, where it was capable of exploring neighboring planets in the solar system, and that earlier lost human civilization, spoken of in all the myths and legends of mankind, may have left those monuments on Mars, and that when we get there, what we'll find is ourselves. This is the possibility that haunts me. Again, I don't know if that's the case, but I think we should do the work. I think we should find out.
If you were to have to hazard a guess regarding Mars and the pyramids and the Sphinx and all the rest of it, what is your best guess? In other words, are the aliens us?
Well, I'm quite certain that the monument on the Giza Plateau are us. This is the work of human beings, and this is the work designed to carry a great human knowledge and a great human secret. I do believe that these monuments are the legacy of a lost human civilization which knew things that we don't know and which understood the mystery of life far better than we do.
Yes, designed by and built by humans?
Oh, yes, designed by and built by humans. I see no need to involve aliens in explaining these monuments on Giza. I think it's a good principle in science that if a simple and elegant explanation exists for a mystery, it is preferable to a more complicated and clumsy explanation.
And yet it doesn't really. You articulated that in the beginning of the interview, that we really could not have built those things.
No, we could have built those things. We just have to abandon our prejudices and assumptions about the past of mankind, that's all. We just have to stop accepting the porridge that's handed out to us by our established academics, who insist on believing that our civilization is the only civilization that has ever reached a high level of development. We have to consider the possibility that we're a species with amnesia. that there is a forgotten civilization way back in our past that was every bit as advanced as we are, perhaps more so, that could do things that we can't do, and that left its fingerprints all around the world. That fingerprints of the gods, that's the message of the Sphinx. That's what my work is all about.
So we could have built those things, but only with the science that we do not today understand.
Yes. We're looking at evidence of something we do not understand here, but that doesn't mean that it isn't human.
When do you suppose, Graham, we will know the truth about the Sphinx? In other words, is it going to plow forth with this big commercial venture despite your protests?
I think that I see evidence all around me that public outrage about this matter is mounting. And I think that the Egyptian authorities are going to have to stop these outrageous projects that are taking place at the pyramids of the Sphinx at the moment. And I think they're going to have to consider the other applications for projects. As I say, a joint one from Boston and Princeton has been put in, and that one would be conducted with full openness and public scrutiny.
What is the timeline if we don't get it stopped?
The timeline, if we don't get it stopped, the clock is ticking very fast right now. These teams are working at those sites at the moment, and we don't know what they're doing. We don't know what is happening there. We don't know what may be being removed already from chambers under the Sphinx. We don't know what may be being put back into those chambers. All these are speculations, but anything is possible when research is being done under conditions of extreme secrecy. That's why I think it's essential that these projects get stopped fast, before this mess gets any bigger and any deeper.
Well, who stops it?
And the Egyptian government is the sovereign power in Egypt.
Yes.
They have the power to stop this if they want to do so, but they need to be persuaded. They need to be persuaded to stop it. Very powerful, wealthy individuals are behind these projects. They seem to have connections to certain high officials in Egypt, particularly the official whose name I mentioned earlier, Zahi Hawass, who's responsible for the pyramids and the Sphinx, and higher-up figures in the Egyptian government have to take the necessary steps. This will happen if a public inquiry is called for. If the public of the world, if our mass media, all our television programs, so-called investigative TV, newspapers endlessly regurgitate the standard Egyptological line, let them consider that they may be looking here at a vastly bigger story than even the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb in the 1920s, that they have a responsibility to investigate this story. If they investigate it, if they put the individuals under the spotlight, if they ask them harsh questions and demand answers, if they inquire into this, then the veil of secrecy will be lifted and these projects will be stopped, and then we have a possibility for proper research to be done.
All right. Should this be a matter beyond Egyptian nationalism?
Yes, it should be a matter beyond Egyptian nationalism. As many enlightened Egyptians have said, they are the stewards of these monuments, but these monuments belong to the entire world. They are a legacy of the whole of mankind. They belong to all of us. Egypt has the privilege and the honor to be the stewards of these monuments today, and they should look after those monuments well, and they should consider the meaning and the importance of those monuments, and that's why they should stop these ghastly projects at that site at the moment.
All right, Graham, I think we've done it, and it's getting close to time for you to get a little bit of sleep before you do whatever you're going to do next. Where are you going to be? Where can people see you or hear you?
Well, I'm going to be I'm going to Dallas. I'm going to St. Louis. St. Louis, is that how I pronounce it?
That's close enough.
I'm going to St. Louis first, and I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow night, or rather this night, because we're now already in Wednesday, aren't we?
Yes. Wednesday,
the 19th of June, at a bookshop called The Library Limited in St. Louis, between 7 o'clock and 8:30. That's at 7700 Forsyth Street, St. Louis.
Yes, okay.
That's on Wednesday, the 19th of June. And then on Thursday, the 20th of June, I'll be in Dallas, Texas, at Borders Bookshop, and I'll be giving a talk. Again, these talks are given with slides, and I give a detailed exposition of the content of the message of the Sphinx. And at all these talks, I make a detailed announcement, more detailed than I can do here on the radio for legal reasons, a detailed announcement concerning what is exactly happening at the pyramids and the Sphinx today as we speak. So the talk I'll be doing at Dallas will be between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night on Thursday, the 20th of June at Borders Bookshop, and that's 10720 Preston Road, Dallas, Texas. And so that's Thursday the 20th of June, and then Wednesday the 19th I'll be in St. Louis at the Library Limited, 7700 Forsyth Street. And then I'll also be doing a talk in Los Angeles a few days later, and I'm just trying to dig that one out.
All right. Well, we're almost out of time.
Yeah,
so...
I'll be doing a talk in Los Angeles as well, but my publishers would be able to give the details. They're Crown Books in New York.
All right. Wonderful. Graham, it has been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to have you on. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, and now it has been done.
Yeah, I'm really glad it happened, Art. It's been an excellent evening's conversation. I've very much enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Take care, my friend. Get some sleep.
Thanks a lot.
Graham Hancock. Told you we'd do that. Now we've done it. I'm Art Bell, and we will be right back. Once again, here I am in a moment. Graham Hancock. You should know who Graham Hancock is. Many, many books to his credit. Fingerprints of the Gods, The Message of the Sphinx, The Sign and the Seal. He's working on a new one, all about Mars. So we'll be asking about that and a whole lot of other things. Well, I'll tell you, the rumors are flying around about Egypt. Our State Department, of course, has warned Americans away, saying they've got indications there's going to be more terrorism in Cairo, and I imagine Egypt is about empty right now. Well, all right. Graham Hancock was formerly East Africa correspondent for The Economist and covered the war between Somalia and Ethiopia. And I'll tell you, for those of you who don't know, The Economist is the publication that everybody in Europe reads. You see it there as you would see the New York Times ads if you're in the middle of New York City. I mean, it's everywhere. He also, by the way, worked for the London Sunday Times. His books include Africa Arc, Peoples of the Horn, the very widely acclaimed Lords of Poverty, which earned the 1990 H.L. Mencken Award for an outstanding book of journalism, The Sign and the Seal, the international bestseller that documented his real-life quest for the Ark of the Covenant, a quest that took him from Jerusalem to southern Egypt and the highlands of northern Ethiopia. In a review, as a matter of fact, of The Sign and the Seal, Hancock was credited by The Guardian with having, quote, invented a new genre, an intellectual whodunit by a do-it-yourself sleuth, end quote. He is a very prolific writer indeed. Message of the Sphinx by Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, and a new work underway now all about Mars, all the way across the continent and all the way across the Atlantic. If we have done it, here is Graham Hancock. Graham, welcome to the program.
Hi, how are you?
I'm just fine, Graham. Very honored to have you back on again.
Thanks. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be on, and I suppose it's deep in the night where you are, and I'm looking at a misty morning in the southwest of England here.
Well, then that is as usual anyway. We've been having...
Yes, all is fine with the planet.
All right. Boy, so much to talk to you about. Graham, I'm going to start right off with the heavy stuff. Here in America, we are having a real row right now about the new global surveyor photographs of the face on Mars. The first photograph came out, and frankly, it looked like the leavings of a cat box, a litter box or something. Certainly not what we originally had seen and called the face. Then there was, in the middle of the night, after all the newspapers had printed this first photograph, there was yet a second photograph, higher res, that looks a lot more like the face that we all know. But nobody printed that. So there's this giant argument going on now. Most of the mainstream news people in America are saying it was nothing but a trick of light and shadows the whole time. And so I'm sure you've heard about all this. What do you think?
Well, certainly, and I've been logging on to the internet sites with images of the face, of course, and also looking at the British press. who have reacted in exactly the same way, which is to look at the medium resolution image that came out first and to say, well, this absolutely proves that there's nothing of interest in terms of artificial structures on Mars. I mean, there seems to me, certainly in the press in Britain, I can't speak for the American press because I haven't seen it, to have been an incredibly hasty and almost relieved reaction along the lines of, oh yes, all those Mars people were just cranks after all, and now NASA has proved it, so we can all rest quietly and forget about it. And I think this is a huge and extraordinary pity that the issue should be taken that way. We're engaged in a seminal event here. This is the first time that we have ever really explored a neighboring world, at least the first time in our memory as a species. And to allow ourselves to be deflected from a very intriguing aspect of that exploration, and to allow ourselves to feel that there's nothing there further to look for in terms of signs of intelligence, is, I think, extremely sad on the basis of this image. Quite frankly, the image is ambiguous. It's extremely ambiguous, and I always felt that it would be.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you, Graham. As a matter of fact, experts here even agree on that, but they nevertheless insist on claiming that this ends the controversy and there is no face.
I think those who support the position of artificiality at Cydonia have definitely been dealt a grievous blow by this photograph. I think it's up to them now to sustain their position. And it has to be remembered, and it's a very important point, that the face structure, whatever it is, whether it's a hill or whether it's actually some kind of face, is set in a context, and that context is very large, surrounded by a lot of other structures. And I think that NASA must, and I believe I hope they will, photograph those other structures on the coming 2 passes that are going to be made over that area. And I think that really what's needed to get to grips with this issue is to look in detail at photographs taken from a variety of different angles, not only of the face, but also of the dozens of other structures that are found all around it. And I think it would be really premature and silly, and in fact I'd go further, stupid of us, to write off this aspect of the Mars mystery simply on the basis of one photograph. We aren't in a much better position now than we were in 1976, and I think that more images are needed before anybody comes to a conclusion. But you know, Art, at the end of the day, this question of images of things is never going to settle the matter. The only thing that's really going to settle the matter, and most people who've been researching in this field have said this from the beginning, the only thing that's really going to settle this matter is a manned landing on Mars. I can give you an example of why I think that, and that concerns another disputed structure, this time on Earth. And that disputed structure is the so-called underwater monument at Yonaguni in Japan. Now, I dive, I scuba dive, and I've dived to that monument more than a dozen times.
Oh, I would really like your impressions of that. This, folks, is off the Ryukyu Islands near Okinawa. And,
that's right.
And what have you found there? What is there?
I'll come to that, but the first thing that I want to tell you is that I've dived at that monument with 2 geologists. On 2 separate occasions, and subsequently I've put those 2 geologists together to discuss the monument in a room. Now, one of the geologists was Professor Robert Schoch from Boston University, who, as you know, is a very open-minded man and is extremely open to the idea of an earlier Sphinx. In fact, he's provided the basic geological work that has raised the whole issue over the age of the Sphinx at Giza. And I thought it would be a very good idea for him to have a look at this underwater monument in Japan. And quite frankly, after 6 dives to the monument, Schoch's impression, although he feels that it definitely merits further research, a great deal of further research, his instinctual impression is that somehow this extraordinary thing is natural. Now, I've also dived there with Professor Masaki Kimura from Okinawa University, who's made more than 100 dives to the monument. Kimura is also a geologist, and he is convinced that it's artificial. So we have here an enormous structure. It's about 500 feet long and 60 feet high, which has been seen and physically touched by two highly qualified geologists, and they both reach different opinions about it. Now, if that happens, with ground truth, actually when you're face-to-face with the object itself, if we can get that level of disagreement over such an object that we can actually see and touch, you can imagine how difficult it is to reach a rational and informed judgment on the face on Mars simply from a photograph.
Well, maybe this is where you can help me out a little bit, Graham. You're absolutely right, of course, and the two camps with regard to the artifacts on Mars are literally at war. I mean, they are ripping each other's guts out. The insults are flying.
Well, you realize, of course, Art, that this is a war for the human soul. This is not a war for some petty scientific definition. This is a war for the question of what we are and what our place is in the universe. Yes. It's a war of paradigm between a view that sees us as the center of creation with nothing else outside us, and a view that sees the universe as filled with life. There's a fundamental issue in society here, which is underlined by this debate. And it's inevitable, since the stakes are so high, since the stakes are our own understanding of what we are, it's inevitable that war, unfortunately, should be fairly bloody, with neither side taking any prisoners. And as they say, and have said for a long time, the first casualty of war is the truth.
Indeed. So then you don't see any, I certainly don't think anything has yet been settled with these photographs. I have high hopes for the ones they're going to yet take of the other artifacts there, but I'll bet when the day is ended, we still have a great big fight on our hands. Do you think in our lifetimes, Graham, it'll ever be settled?
I think the only way that it can be settled is to land on Mars and look at these issues, and that requires a scientific establishment which is prepared to recognize that as a priority. The way that NASA has presented this whole recent adventure is as a kind of sop to public opinion. Oh, well, the public got a bit excited about this, so we'll just show them how stupid they are. And I just think that that's a very sad and dull attitude to this whole wonderful mystery. Mars is the most intriguing planet in the solar system.
But then it's also one, Graham, that doesn't make any sense, because NASA, of course, would want to be funded to try a man shot to Mars. And that effort would certainly get a big boost if they found something that appeared to be artificial. Now, the conspiratorialists, on the other hand, think that NASA is hiding all of this.
You know what I think may be being hidden is more profound than that. I think that Mars has something to tell us about the cataclysmic history of the Earth. I think that if one really gets to grips with Mars and looks at this extraordinary planet, which has a thing called the line of dichotomy running along the middle of it, it's like an equator, only it's tilted at about 35 degrees to the present equator of Mars, and it divides the planet roughly into two hemispheres. And north of the line of dichotomy, the planet is 3 kilometers lower than it is south of the line of dichotomy. So one can almost imagine a ragged line of cliffs running all the way around the planet, dropping sheer down 3 kilometers to a lower area, and that lower area is extremely smooth and uncratered, whereas the southern part of Mars is unbelievably devastated with thousands of massive 30-kilometer plus wide craters. This planet has been hit by the most horrific devastation from space. It's been hit by a bombardment of asteroids, or I believe more likely fragments of a giant comet. And the question that really arises is Earth subject to the same fate that Mars has been subject? And this is why the monuments on Mars, in inverted commas, of course, the alleged monuments on Mars, are so interesting to me, because taken in context with the cataclysmic history of the planet, with, again, disputed evidence of primitive microbial life on the planet, which under any normal evolutionary laws one would expect eventually to have developed into higher life forms. But to me, this raises a whole other issue over the story of life on Mars and the story of what happened to Mars and the story of what happened to Earth. And I've become very aware during the research for the book on Mars that I'm publishing in June of a huge body of scientific study into the issue of asteroid and comet impact. A huge body of scientific study that has really not made its way out in any thorough manner to the general public. And believe me, this is scary, scary, scary material. And I can understand why certain people in government and in science would not want that material, the real story of what happened to Mars, to get too much out into the public domain.
Well, what was Mars once? Mars had an atmosphere, I believe, a rather thicker atmosphere than it does now.
There's no doubt that Mars once had a dense and possibly Earth-like atmosphere, that Mars had oceans, that Mars had rivers that ran for millions of years, etching deep channels in the surface of Mars. And there's no doubt that all of this formerly attractive and undoubtedly potentially life-bearing atmosphere of Mars, there's no doubt that it was all stripped away as a result of a horrific cataclysm. You have to envisage this planet, which is about half the size of the Earth, being hit by a massive simultaneous bombardment of huge quantities of rock from outer space, very, very, very large. We're looking at some massive object which fragments close to Mars and which peppers the entire southern hemisphere of the planet south of this line of dichotomy with an enormous explosion of objects.
Dr. Van Flanderen rather believes that it is an exploded planet that used to be, that in fact Mars was a moon of that planet. Your theory is very much like that, but you think rather that it was a series or a very large, kind of like
there's a couple of problems with the exploded planet theory. I'm familiar with Van Flanderen's work, and I think it's very interesting work. But one problem with an exploded planet theory is to explain how you explode a planet in the first place.
Yes. Which
is something that Van Flanderen has never successfully done, in my opinion. And the other theory which has been put forward by a number of people, of a planet-sized body coming close to the existing Mars and then exploding, also raises the question of how a planet-sized body does that, how it moves into an orbit that would bring it close to Mars. But there are objects in our solar system which are capable of doing this damage and which we're all familiar with, and those objects are comets. And what's, I think, not widely understood by the general public is that comets can vary enormously in size, and a group of astronomers, including Victor Klube of Oxford University in Britain, Fred Hoyle, and Chandra Wickram Singh, and others, have developed a theory concerning giant comets, objects 300 or 400 kilometers wide, which drift in from the outer solar system and which fragment as they come close to planets, rather as Shoemaker-Levy 9 fragmented in 1994.
With what kind of return cycle?
Well, the thing about comets is that we really know almost nothing about them. Our entire database on comets is really based on 300 years of observations from this tiny corner of the solar system, which itself is a tiny little pocket of the galaxy.
Well, we watch Shoemaker-Levy 9 fragment and then plow into Jupiter. If instead of Jupiter, those pieces had plowed into Earth, what would have been the result?
End of all life on Earth, without any doubt. Without any doubt. The planet would have been sterilized. There would be no life left at all. The planet would be a bit like Mars, actually.
So we have a rather recent example close by of this occurring.
Yes, we have. It's as though the cosmos decided to give us a warning call, a kind of wake-up call. Hey guys, look what comets can do to planets. Here's Jupiter, giant planet, made largely of gas. You think it would shoulder aside or absorb an object like this? Well, let's just show you what 21 fragments of a 40-kilometer wide comet can do to a planet. And we saw the gates of hell open on Jupiter when those fragments of a comet hit it.
Yes, we did. All right, Graham, hold on. We're at the bottom of the hour. Rest. We'll be right back to you. My guest from Great Britain, live, is Graham Hancock, a very, very prolific author. And also, one of those who will be along debating with Zahi Hawass Daniel Brinkley, Robert Bovall, Dr. Krupp. Oh, that's going to be some cruise. We'll tell you about it. I'm Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast AM. Now, let us operate with the scenario that we are sort of skirting around, or maybe we're not skirting around it, and that is that man has been around before, that our origins may not be what we think they are. There has been a new discovery in southern Egypt that is confounding the Egyptians. All over the world, we are making discoveries that suggest all the timelines we thought were right are wrong. But Graham, will the world accept that, or do you think that it ought to be kept secret?
I'll tell you, the bottom line for me, Art, is I believe that this wonderful planet that we live on is in enormous danger. I'm convinced of this now, and I really can't quite understand why it is that the work of the scientists who have been embedded in this field for a long time, the field of giant comets and asteroid research, I really can't understand why their work hasn't got out to the public to the extent that it should have done, because what that work shows is that we are in clear and present danger, and yet it is a danger which it is possible for mankind to avert. But if we're going to avert this danger, we need a complete change of heart, a complete change of attitude. Ours is a species that has become immersed to an appalling degree in materialism and in a kind of wicked violence during the course of this century. And accompanying that wicked violence has been a closure of mind to all that cannot be immediately weighed and measured and empirically tested.
Yes.
And it's the reverse side of the coin that leads to the blind, horrific violence of which our species is so careful. And because it has led us to be closed-minded and blind, it causes us to ignore the danger that confronts us, and it causes us to ignore the advice and the warnings of the ancients on this matter. It's as though we've deliberately cut off our entire heritage as a species beyond the last 2,000 or 3,000 years when things have been written down. Everything before that is just considered to be irrelevant to us. And yet what we have there is the accumulated advice of our ancestors who undoubtedly experienced cataclysmic events before, particularly at the end of the last ice age. And because of the state of mind that we're plunged in today, we're ignoring that. And if we continue to ignore it, I'm convinced that we're going to pay a terrible price, and that in the language of ancient mythology, that the gods will once again punish us for our arrogance and our cruelty.
Well, I suppose this is pure speculation, but if the Hall of Records is ever uncovered, would you expect it to contain, Graham, a sort of a instruction manual from those who were once here about the mistake they made that shouldn't be made again? Is that what they left for us?
I'm convinced that such a message has been passed down to us, not just in a single Hall of Records, but in an entire network of monuments all around the world, which are linked to mythology and linked to astronomy. And using the tools of astronomy and an open-minded consideration of mythology and of the nature of the monuments, there is an enormous amount of information that has been very carefully encoded and deliberately passed down to us by our ancestors. But we have to take a step. In order to benefit from that information, we have to be prepared to listen to what they have to say. And right now, we're not.
Let me quickly turn my attention, because we don't have a lot of time. I want to talk about Dr. Zahi Hawass a little bit.
Yeah.
There is a persistent rumor that Dr. Zahi Hawass has been removed from office. Now, this is a fairly recent rumor, and I wonder if you've heard anything.
I have not heard anything of that, and I have no reason to assume that that's the case. As you know, I'm participating in a conference on board a cruise ship, a floating conference, the first ever confrontation between myself and Zahi Hawass.
Yes, I should tell you, Graham, that I interviewed Zahi about the coming cruise, and he suggested that somebody might get tossed in the water, and I think that he might have had you or Robert in mind.
Well, I don't think so, actually, because there's been a series of developments over the course of the last year concerning ourselves and Zahi. And I last met with Zahi in December in Egypt, at which time I spent 6 hours around Sphinx with him, and at which time he showed himself willing to answer any question that I had to ask and to show me anything that I wanted to see. This meeting of mine with Zahi had been preceded by a meeting that Robert Laval had with Zahi in July of 1997, and had been preceded by a meeting in November of 1997 that John Anthony West had with Zahi. And I feel that a number of painful issues that have arisen and been the subject of a great deal of controversy over the last 2 to 3 years are on the verge of resolution, and that all parties to this debate are no longer anxious to engage in personal attacks and personal insults, but rather want to get down and discuss the issues, the real issues, the issues of the true origins of mankind, the past of our species.
Well, then
discuss those issues in depth, and that's why we're doing this conference.
Then let us, yes, of course, let us then discuss what really might be. I, too, last year went to Giza and got a personal tour by Zahi, and of course he said, you can ask anything you want, you can go anywhere you want, and I did. But I also realized, Graham, that if there was something going on there that Zahi did not want to tell me about, and I did not know to ask, believe me, I would not know that it was there. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. The situation which we often forget is that Egypt has a government, and that Zahi Hawass is a senior official in that government. And like any country with a government, it has a right to run its affairs in the way that it chooses. And we will be told exactly what the Egyptian government wants to tell us, and nothing else. This is a certain fact, and we should not expect any more. I feel that the best way forward is definitely to engage in dialogue, and through that dialogue, through a gradual opening to consideration of wider issues, that we may in the future get better information on Giza than we've had in the past. And I'm at present cautiously optimistic that better information will be available during the course of this year and will be shared with the general public. Because one thing that the debates and the controversy over the last 2 years have done, without any doubt, is that they've made the Egyptian government aware of international public opinion. They've made the Egyptian government aware that a very large number of people in countries all around the world are deeply concerned by what happens at Giza. And I'm pleased to say that awareness on the part of the Egyptian government does now seem to be translating itself into a new spirit of openness. I hope I'm right.
I hope you are, too. When I last spoke with Zahi here on the air, he announced that he was going to close the Great Pyramid for a 6 or 8 month period. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I am aware of that, and I personally never feel happy when a monument like the Great Pyramid is closed down for 8 months, and I cannot understand the logic of closing the Great Pyramid for 8 months. Mm-hmm. It isn't necessary to close it for 8 months in order to conduct renovations in it.
Oh, could it be he has other work to do?
Look, this possibility of work, archaeology, investigations being done at Giza out of the public eye is one that will never go away. This is a place where the stakes for investigators are very high. They're high for 2 reasons. Firstly, because a serious archaeologist who regards himself as a member of that profession and who values the opinions of his peers is placing himself in mortal danger every time he looks for anything at Giza beyond the normal, routine, run-of-the-mill theory of Egyptologists. So for one can see reasons why people who were investigating such issues at Giza would wish to keep it from the public, purely because they don't want to be embarrassed if they turn out to be wrong. And of course, one can envisage other much more sinister reasons why secrecy might take place. Personally, I think that this decision to close the Great Pyramid for 8 months is going to lead to an enormous amount of speculation.
Of course, at the moment, it may not matter. There are so many warnings about travel to Egypt that almost nobody's going there anyway.
Yeah, Egypt has been devastated by this whole situation, and it was very sad to note when I was there in December, and I traveled very widely around the country at that time, that there were almost no foreigners in Egypt at all, almost none. And this has come about because of very naturally, because people don't want to get shot and murdered while they're visiting a temple. But the situation, like so many issues, has been really badly overplayed. I found on my travels in Egypt in December that the country is safer than it's ever been. I mean, at long last, the Egyptian government has taken a step it should have taken long ago, which is to put armed and highly visible units, and clearly competent and professional men at all of these sites. If those armed men had been present at the Temple of Hatshepsut during last year's massacre, there would have been no massacre.
You can get your reaction to it. This is a Guardian Spotlight interview of Dr. Hawass. The Guardian asked him, Dr. Hawass, I'm sure you're aware that Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock are publicly saying negative things about you and others who oversee the treasures of ancient Egypt. Dr. Hawass, yes, it is unfortunate, the things they are saying. For example, Hancock and Bauval are asking people to sign petitions to stop secretive work at Giza, but he says there is no secret work going on at Giza. Of course, for Hancock and Bauval to suggest some kind of conspiracy at Giza helps them sell books. They profit from the pyramids, while in Egypt we struggle to conserve these treasures.
When was that done?
That was in March of '97.
Yeah, that was a year ago. It's interesting to hear that voice from the past, because it is a voice from the past, and things have moved on a lot in the last year. The first point that I'd like to make is that the issue of petitions and of the public campaign regarding excavations at Giza was 100% successful. The project at Giza to which we objected, the project involving Florida State University looking for tunnels and chambers under the Sphinx in an extremely secretive manner, and undoubtedly with certainly on the part of some individuals involved in that project, a background hidden agenda. That project was stopped, and I don't believe that project I don't believe it would have been stopped if there hadn't been this massive public reaction to it. And we felt very strongly that whatever is to happen at Giza in the future, that project should not continue. Because the nature of the project was fundamentally flawed. The other thing that has happened following the meeting that Zahi Hawass had with John West in November is that he has indicated a powerful willingness on the part of the Egyptian authorities to reconsider the Boston proposal which John West and Robert Schoch had put in to conduct a thorough geological scientific investigation of the Sphinx. This was the other problem that Robert Bauval and I had with Zahi Hawass, was the way that earlier project had been arbitrarily stopped and then replaced with a much more suspect one, pursuing rather similar objectives. That situation has been redressed. The objectives of our campaign have, as far as we're concerned, been achieved, and we see no reason to engage in further personal animosity. What we want to do is to get down and discuss the issues and keep a serious public debate and public awareness going on about Giza well into the future.
All right, well, let's address one of those. When I was at Giza, Dr. Hawass took me to the base of one of the pyramids where he had several workers, and he said, Art, I am going to show you how the Egyptians built the pyramids. Upon which he said, look at this a 1-ton or 5-ton stone, limestone, I can't remember what it was, and a worker got up on top of this giant rock, and started pounding on it all the way around until incredibly it cracked right in half in front of my eyes. I've got it on video, and he said, Art, that is how the pyramids were built.
Yes, the only problem is that there's 2.5 million blocks like that, and they're raised to a height of 450 feet above the ground with absolute spot-on modern scientific precision to north, south, east, and west. That would be a trick that nobody today could pull off. But of course, we agree, when I say we, I mean myself, John West, Robert Baval, and others, we disagree fundamentally with Zahi Hawass and the Egyptologists over this issue. We think the pyramids are an enormous mystery, and we think that any rational and reasonable human being should see that immediately. But we're glad that the level of debate on this has now stopped being a series of vituperative personal attacks and has moved on to the level of serious discussion involving serious academics and ourselves in looking in depth at this issue and trying to present our case jointly in front of the public.
Well, do you think if the age of these artifacts, and now new ones, I believe, discovered to the south? A
very intriguing megalithic circle has been found in southern Egypt, somewhat south of Aswan, which has rather like a small version of Stonehenge in some ways, which has very precise astronomical alignments, and which appears to be extremely old, perhaps as old as 6,500 years, perhaps older because you can't date stone. Again, what this shows is a heritage of astronomical and architectural knowledge in Egypt, which has previously been dismissed by Egyptologists as impossible.
But the age of these things would tamper with a lot of what Egyptians believe as their personal paradigms, would it not?
Yes, I think that Egyptians and indeed the whole world has to wake up to the exciting possibility that Egyptian civilization may be much older than we have previously thought it to be. There's been a kind of, again, it's been part of the hysterical media climate over this issue. Has been in Egypt itself a tendency to say that whenever somebody like me or John West or Robert Baval stands up and says that there's evidence of an older civilization in Egypt, that we're somehow trying to steal history from the Egyptians. And our view really is this is a terrible misunderstanding of what we mean, because what we are actually trying to say is that Egyptian history is much older and much more noble than anybody could ever have imagined, that this country bears a legacy for the whole of mankind, and that legacy goes deeply back into prehistory, and that it's a legacy of knowledge and wisdom which we desperately need today.
Well, as you well know, Edgar Cayce predicted the location of the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx, and I interviewed Edgar E. Cayce's son, and I believe that this is the year, is it not, that discovery was to be made? What do you think?
Yes, it's very interesting. There's the Cayce readings indicate an opening of the Hall of Records in 1998, and unfortunately indicate that opening being conducted in secretive conditions and not being shared with the general public. That's why we felt that a project which was connected, albeit loosely, to the Edgar Cayce organization, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, was perhaps not the best organization to be conducting an archaeological excavation at the Sphinx in 1997.
Do you see that, again now, the Great Pyramid, as you know, is being closed, and there has been quite a bit of talk about a possible tunnel. In fact, I believe there's some ground-penetrating radar indicating that indeed there is some sort of tunnel angling down toward beneath the Sphinx, and sure enough, there are chambers that they believe they've located beneath the Sphinx and so forth. You don't suppose during this 8-month period that they'll be looking, do you?
Anything is possible, and I wouldn't be surprised if people are looking under the Sphinx and inside the pyramid, because of course we have the question of the doorway inside the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber in the Great Pyramid as well, which Zahi did indicate to me would be opened publicly this year, and specifically in September or October this year. We just have to be sensible about this and realize that this is a site on which anything can happen at any time without the public knowing about it, because it's on the sovereign territory of a nation called Egypt, and that nation called Egypt, much though we may dislike it, has got the right to make up its mind what it does.
All right.
and is not obliged to inform anybody. What Robert Bauval and I and John West have been trying to do is to widen this debate so that there is public awareness about it, and so that the Egyptian government realizes that it really should, that it's in its interest.
All right, Graham, we are at the top of the hour, so hold tight, and I'd like to do one more hour if I could with you, and let the audience ask you questions.
Sure.
All right. When we come back, your opportunity with Graham Hancock. I'm Art Bell from the high desert. This is Coast to Coast AM. Good morning, everybody. My guest is Graham Hancock, and he's going to be back in a moment. This hour, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask him any question you wish about his work, his investigation, his books. Just a couple, Fingerprints of the Gods. Many of you have read that. The Message of the Sphinx, The Sign and the Seal. A new book coming on Mars shortly. At any rate, it's going to be your opportunity with Graham Hancock. Just one caution. I'm going to ask you to be short and to the point. Because there is, of course, a transatlantic delay, so it would be best if you ask your question and then pause and allow him to answer that question. Otherwise, it gets kind of mixed up with the delay between here and Great Britain, because he's with us live from Great Britain. So coming up shortly, Graham Hancock.
To talk with Art Bell in the Kingdom of Nye. From east of the Rockies, dial 1-800-825-5033. West of the Rockies.
Cruise next month, May 10th through the 17th. There's going to be a great debate on board. It will be Dr. Zahi Hawass, Daniel Brinkley, Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, Dr. Ed Krupp, and I will moderate all of this, and it's really going to be something. And, of course, it's going to be a wonderful cruise. Now, at the bottom of the hour, I'll tell you how. I'll give you a number to call if you wish to come along, because we can still fit you in, I think. Come back?
Hi, Art, yes.
Hi there.
Good to hear you again.
I would very much now like to allow you to talk to some of the people out there that have a lot of questions. We've got an awful lot. Boy, how many books have you sold, Graham?
Fingerprints of the Gods has sold 4.5 million copies.
Wow.
Around the world.
That's absolutely astounding.
Yeah, the book has been something of a phenomenon, and this definitely annoys the entire historical establishment, who basically are envious of the book's sales and of the response that it's had in the public. But the book survives and continues to sell, and I think that if it was fundamentally wrong in any area, that wouldn't have happened.
I quite agree with you. Let's go to the phones as promised. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Graham Hancock. Where are you calling from, please?
Good morning. This is Glenn calling from Denver, Colorado.
Denver.
I'm listening to you on 6:30 a.m. here.
Yes, sir. Okay, Hal. You have a question for Graham? Go ahead.
Yes, I do, Graham. I have two quick questions for you regarding Fingerprints of the Gods.
Yeah.
The first question is, the Great Pyramid is very interesting in terms of its geometry, which requires very accurate measurements of its dimensions, and yet we know that the facing stones from the Great Pyramid have largely been removed. So I'm curious about how that problem was dealt with by the scientists and others who examined it. My other question...
Well, hold on, sir. One at a time. Go ahead, Graham.
Okay, yes, let me reply to that first. Fortunately, some fragments of the original facing stones of the Great Pyramid at the base have survived, and we have quite a lot of the original cladding of the second pyramid near the summit, which has survived. And from this information, it's been possible to do, I believe, highly accurate projections. These have been done by completely orthodox Egyptologists and scientists, which give us the precise dimensions, exterior dimensions of the Great Pyramid before the cladding fell off. It's a relatively routine to do, I believe, highly accurate projections. These have been done by completely orthodox Egyptologists and scientists, which give us the precise dimensions, exterior dimensions of the Great Pyramid before the cladding fell off. It's a relatively routine mathematical problem, and it's been solved fully to my satisfaction. So I think we can count on the dimensions that have been well worked out since the end of the 19th century.
And your second question?
My second question concerns the caption underneath a very interesting photograph of the object in the King's Chamber, which is referred to as a sarcophagus.
Yes.
In the information under the caption, you mentioned the speed with which a tubular drill apparently removed this material, very, very hard granite material. I'm wondering how you arrived at that conclusion.
Well, I rely on the work of two men. One, Flinders Petrie, a great Egyptologist at the turn of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and the other, Christopher Dunn, a machine tool maker who lives just south of Chicago and who has been involved in the machine tool making and specifically drill making business for most of his life, and who, by the way, has a book on the engineering of the Great Pyramid coming out. Now, Chris Dunn's work and Petrie's work both concur that this object, whatever it is, and we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's a sarcophagus, that this object was hollowed out using incredibly high-speed drills. Not only this object, but other granite objects in Egypt as well have been found which were cut in this way, and in some cases the drill cores have survived. You get a core with a tubular drill which cuts down into the stone and leaves a central core, which is then knocked out, and another drilling is done, and gradually they hollow the object out. Now, what's interesting from the drill cores is that it's possible to calculate the speed at which the drill was turning. And both Flinders Petrie at the turn of the 19th century and Chris Dunn in the last decade have demonstrated beyond any doubt, beyond any shadow of doubt in my view, that these drills were turning at an uncannily fast rate, in fact as fast or faster than modern power drills. And this becomes just one more of the many enigmas of Giza, which has rather been brushed under the carpet by academics.
So that people understand what it is you're telling them right now, you're talking about a higher speed drill than we have now in the modern day, and this would have been done how long ago?
Well, at least 4,500 years ago, if we accept the orthodox dating for the pyramid, and perhaps long before that. It's a very disturbing and troubling finding, and as I say, it's a finding which really can't be written off as a sort of lunatic fringe speculation, because of the real solidity of the two people separated by almost 100 years who came up with this information. Flinders Petrie in the early 1900s was completely baffled. I mean, this was perhaps one of the most orthodox of all orthodox Egyptologists, and he really believed that he'd demolished most 19th century speculation about the pyramid, but he was baffled by this one issue of the speed of the drills, because the ancient Egyptians in that period, the period of the construction of the Great Pyramid, are really supposed to have only had copper tools. And any fool knows that copper cannot cut into a stone as hard as granite.
Indeed.
No matter how much you temper the copper, you just can't drill granite with it. And if you embed, for example, jewels into the tip of the tubular drill, you then have the question of the pressure that's applied to the drill, and that pressure would collapse any copper tube. So we have a real problem here, which has never been resolved, and which hints very strongly at a lost technology at Giza.
Graham, I had the opportunity while I was there to lie in what is called the sarcophagus. And
oh, me too. I've done that. It's a great place to be.
Yes, and I noticed there were some very, very, very unusual acoustic properties when one speaks in there, and Boris Said and others have done acoustic work in that chamber and have found some pretty strange things. Do you have any comments on the acoustics of that?
Well, they're extremely powerful. They have an extremely powerful effect on any person uttering sound in that chamber. It's best to be in it alone, really.
Yes.
Or at most with one or two other people who are prepared to keep absolutely silent. But
that was the case, Graham, and I must say I cannot even find words to tell you what I experienced. Yes,
it's a really disturbing sound. It quite shakes you up. And of course I'm convinced that the entire chamber and the so-called sarcophagus were designed to produce such effects. I've been convinced for a long time that the notion that the Great Pyramid was simply the tomb of some megalomaniac pharaoh is a completely idiotic idea, which unfortunately has been foisted upon us with great success by Egyptologists during most of the last century. I'm sure that the purpose and function these monuments has been completely misunderstood by Egyptologists, and that they're designed to have an effect on human consciousness, and that they do have that effect, and that they have it by many different means, one of which is sound.
All right, let's keep moving. A wildcard line, you're on the air with Graham Hancock in Great Britain. Where are you, please?
Yes, hi.
Hello, speak up good and loud. Where are you, sir?
I'm Marshall from Vancouver, BC.
Vancouver, British Columbia. Okay, do you have a question?
Yes, I have two.
Fire away.
First question is, hi, Graham.
Hi.
Have you ever read The Keys of Enoch?
Yes, I have read The Keys of Enoch, and I know Jim Hertak.
You do?
It's a very interesting book.
It is very interesting, because he makes references to the tunnels in page 73 and page 74 of the tunnels. He makes significant.
I've always felt that in this respect and in other respects of his analysis of Giza, that James Hertak, by some means which I don't fully understand, managed to be very far ahead of the game back there in the early 70s when he wrote that book.
Yes, it's 73 actually when he published this book.
Yeah, no, it's quite extraordinary. He also highlights the connection with Orion, which really didn't get properly into the public domain until Robert finally put the pieces together, and Robert Bauval, and came up with the Orion correlation theory, which makes sense of all that. Now, Hertak didn't speak of an Orion correlation, but he did speak of a connection between the pyramid and Orion, and he did so way back in 73. So, again, I don't know how he did it, but it's a great achievement.
Right. When did they first start to make extensive excavation or research the tunnels under the pyramid and the Sphinx?
Well, we don't really know how long this has been going on. It's written that since the early 70s, there has been a series of projects which have addressed themselves to this mystery, the mystery of tunnels and chambers under the Sphinx and indeed inside the Great Pyramid. And one of the odd things is the way that virtually every project which has ever got going on this has sooner or later been stopped by the Egyptian authorities. But that may simply be because so many of these projects do actually turn out to have a hidden agenda. It's difficult to say why, but the history of exploration and excavation at Giza over the last 20 plus years has been very peculiar, and it does seem that there has been an ongoing, continuous concern regarding the possibility of tunnels and chambers. And personally, I'm absolutely sure that the whole of the Giza Plateau, what we see above the ground, is matched by an enormous tunnel system under the ground. It stands to reason that anybody who could build up as successfully as the pyramid builders did could also build down. And indeed, they were masters of hewing out of solid rock.
Right.
The most amazing construction.
Right. My drafting 11 teacher told me that the pyramids, from where he stood and understood, could only have been built from the top down.
Well, I find that difficult to see how that could be. I must say, the issue of putting the cladding on is another matter. I think there's no doubt that the pyramid was built from the base up, as far as the core structure of the pyramid goes, which is the structure that we see today, the 2.5 million gigantic blocks that make up the body of the pyramid. But the issue of the cladding, the covering of the pyramid, which fell off in antiquity, is another matter, and much does suggest that must have been laid in place from the top down.
Now, while I realize, Graham, that you have a sort of a new communication with Zahi Hawass, I've got to ask about this. When I was in Egypt, I asked Zahi about the allegation that he will invite various institutions and groups to Egypt to do ground-penetrating radar work and all other sorts of work, and then just when they find something, that's the moment that somehow or another they manage to get kicked off the plateau, and a lot of people feel the work then goes on in secret. Now, of course, he said that's asinine and ridiculous. What do you say?
Well, what I say is that if a research group gets a properly authorized excavation and investigation permit, a scientific permit, as opposed to a commercial license which simply allows people to make films and so on, and if that group sticks honestly to the terms of that permit, then there's no way that they're going to be thrown off the site. But if, on the other hand, as has been the case in the past, a group does not stick to the terms of its permit, if, for example, it has a commercial license and it starts doing scientific work, or if it has a scientific license but is actually doing different scientific work from the work set out in the license, then that group can definitely expect to be stopped. So it's incumbent upon anybody wanting to work at Giza. First of all, again, some of us in the West find this hard to deal with, but we have to accept the fact that Egypt is a sovereign government and has a right to run its affairs the way it wants. We have to work within the ball game that they set. What I detect is a new openness, a new willingness to consider proposals. And as long as those proposals are stuck to by the group concerned, I believe that they will be allowed to do their work.
Well, but then that, of course, has to be balanced. I realize the sovereignty, and I have great respect for it, but the message, if it is there, is for the entire world, not just Egypt.
Yeah, that's why it's so important that everybody working in this field is completely honest and open. If people really are looking for hidden chambers under the Sphinx, then they must tell the Egyptian authorities that that's what they're doing. They mustn't try to pull a fast one on the Egyptian authorities. They mustn't say, well, we're here to do some kind of survey or other, but not really specify hidden chambers, when actually their whole objective is to search for hidden chambers. Now, the problem in the past has been that the Egyptian government really wouldn't say yes to any team that was looking for hidden chambers, and therefore there was a natural tendency on the part of those teams to somewhat disguise their motive.
I understand.
My view is that this situation has changed, and I believe that it has changed because of the voice of the public that's been heard in the last 2 years. And I believe that the Egyptian government is very sensitive and very concerned to be seen to be doing the right thing. So I think there's a new spirit of investigation afoot, and I think that this offers an opportunity for serious research at Giza into extraordinary possibilities. But those doing the research must be honest about their objectives.
All right. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Graham Hancock in Great Britain. Hi.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I'm thrilled to be talking with your guest.
Sure. Where are you calling from?
Gainesville, Georgia. My name is Joanne.
Hi, Joanne.
I have a very important question. I was intrigued with the sign and the seal, and I was wondering what, if anything, does Mr. Hancock know about the Israelis' plans for rebuilding of the Third Temple?
Well, the answer to your question is not very much. I've always doubted that the government of Israel would put itself directly behind any attempt to build the Third Temple, because the issue is so explosive politically. But there's no doubt that there are important groups in Israel which are absolutely determined to build the Third Temple, and which indeed have fully developed architectural plans in place and are just waiting for their moment.
Do you have any information or know anything about the so-called unblemished red heifer that has been born?
Well, I have to confess that side of things interests me much less than others. I'm not impressed by the work concerning the red heifer and various bits of dust and oil that have been found in the Dead Sea area and so on. I just think that it just makes very little sense to me.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you were to see these signs rapidly unfolding, it would get your attention, I'm sure.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that certain signs are rapidly unfolding. And those signs are there for anybody to see, and that is that we live in a very dangerous time, and anybody who has studied biblical prophecy will be aware of the prophecy of the last of days and the end of time. And one thing for sure, and again I don't know how it came about, is that all the conditions of that terrible prospect are in place today.
Yeah, and I take it you feel that it is so close, Graham, the danger so great and so close, that we had better get to finding out what the message is while we have time?
First of all, a change of heart. A species like ours, the human beings today, this problem, worldwide problem of pedophilia, people who murder children for pleasure, people who annihilate whole countries just because they feel like doing it.
Oh, I know.
These are members of our species, and while we allow this kind of grotesque outrage to continue, we will never, ever, ever come to grips with the real danger that faces us from the cosmos.
I could not have said it better. Graham Hancock, stand by. And now I am going to ask the audience to get a piece of paper and a pencil, because when we come back after this break, I will take a moment and tell you how you can still, if you wish, come along on this incredible cruise. I mean, the cruise by itself is something that will remain with you for all your life. I guarantee. I've been there, I know. But the debate on board, oh my, this is one you don't want to miss. So get some paper and a pencil, and we'll be right back. Good morning, I'm Art Bell. My guest is Graham Hancock, and he is one of the participants who'll be along on this incredible cruise. Trust me when I tell you, it's once in a lifetime. When you've seen a gigantic glacier coming down to water that is as clear as any water you've ever seen in your entire life. As a matter of fact, it's kind of like a mirror. There is no way. I put some photographs on the website last time I went to Alaska. There is no way to describe to you the majesty and the understanding that's imparted to you when you go on this cruise. It's something important you can do with money. You know, money really has limited use once you're comfortable, once you have enough to be comfortable. One of the only good uses for it, in my opinion, is to travel and to see things that you would not otherwise ever see. We'll be on a deluxe ship, the Stotendam, Holland America Lines, and believe me, it is luxurious, very luxurious. It'll be May 10th through the 17th. I'll be going through the inside passage in Alaska, 2 days cruising the inside passage. It'll be with you for the rest of your life. But then as kind of a gigantic bonus to the whole thing, on the way back down from Alaska toward Vancouver, itself a great destination, there will be a great debate on board this ship, and I mean a great debate, with Dr. Zahi Hawass, Daniel Brinkley, Graham Hancock, Robert Bluval, Dr. Ed Krupp. I will moderate this whole thing. If you would like to come along, there still is an opportunity for you to do so. Here's how you do it. Nationwide, you can call 1-800-888-5509. Let me give that again. 1-800-888-5509. In fact, it's about a month. It's about a month now, and we'll be on our way. 1-800-888-5509, or in California. If you're in California, you must call area code 310-568-0138. That's area code 310-568-0138. Love to have you come along. You'll remember it all your life, I guarantee. 5 to Great Britain and Graham Hancock. Graham, I've got a fax I want to read here. It says, when I read The Sign and the Seal, I couldn't put it down. Graham's investigation and storytelling are completely engrossing. Whenever I meet someone from Ethiopia, I tell them I know they have the Ark of the Covenant, and they smile and seem very proud. Indeed, do they have it, Graham?
Oh yes, I'm quite sure they do. That's why I wrote a 580-page book saying so. Really, the circumstantial evidence is compelling that's where this extraordinary lost object is, and I think that a reasonable approach to the evidence will lead any sensible person to the conclusion that the Ethiopian claim has an enormous amount of merit to it.
Will the world get an opportunity to see it, or will the guards remain where they are?
No, the world will not get an opportunity to see it, and the world was never meant to see the Ark of the Covenant. It's a sacred object, and it's a power object, and it's an object that from its very beginning has been in the custodianship of a lineage of priests, since it's been like that for several thousands of years, I think it's probably quite good if it stays that way.
All right. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Graham Hancock in Great Britain. Where are you, please?
I'm in Tinley Park, Illinois.
All right.
And I have a question. It's concerning a paper he mentioned by Francois Chabas concerning a wand that was used by the ancient Hebrews and Egyptians from the Museum of Art and Archaeology in France. And I was wondering what he thought that wand did.
Sorry, I didn't mention this paper, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, he's talking about a wand? Is that right, caller?
Yes.
I guess he is not familiar with it.
I don't know anything about this paper.
All right.
Well, it was mentioned in one of your books by Francois Chabas.
Well, maybe I'm not understanding your pronunciation.
It was called De la Usage Despotans of the Ancient Hebrews and the Egyptians.
Give me the name. I really don't understand this name.
Francois Chabas.
Francois, yes.
Chabas, Chabas.
Chabas. It doesn't ring a bell. Which book was this in? It was in The Sign and the Seal?
Yes.
Oh. Well, I referred to more than 1,000 separate individual sources. You'll have to forgive me for having forgotten one of them.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, I guess, of being as prolific as you are.
Well, I wrote The Sign and the Seal 8 years ago, and since writing the Sign and the Seal, I've written several other enormous books, and all of these books draw on a huge database. And in fact, that's part of the service that I really try to provide to my readers is to give them access to all the original sources I used, which in every case runs into well over 1,000. And those are there in the footnotes and the references, and people can follow up those sources themselves. My objective really isn't to provide final answers to people, but to provide intelligent and inquiring people with food for thought to follow their own quest.
I would really like to ask you a question, Graham. As a talk show host, I have dealt in this kind of material now for years. Yep. And I have made the assessment through thousands, if not tens of thousands of letters that I receive commenting on my various programs, that the kind of material we are now discussing inevitably makes about 20% of the people who write to me very, very angry. And I'm sure that you must get a great deal of correspondence. What percentage would you say reacts in that way?
Well, it's curious. I do get a great deal of correspondence, and it runs into tens of thousands of letters.
Yes.
And they keep coming, and the correspondence is almost always very interesting. My one regret is that it's so overwhelming that it's been impossible for me to answer it individually. I just can't deal with the deluge. I find myself I'd spend my whole life writing letters if I did.
No, I fully understand, but the question was...
I have not, to be honest, encountered very significant hostility. In fact, the percentage of hostile letters is so small, such a fraction of 1%, as to be almost negligible. By and large, it's been very, very positive. These letters don't tend to be just saying thank you for writing a nice book. They tend to be raising queries and questions which are exactly what I hope these books would do. But no, not hostility, not anger. That's come exclusively from the academic establishment, and the academic establishment have certainly reacted with hostility and anger to all my books and to the public support that these books get. And that's why I feel this cruise that we're doing is so important, because the first time ever that there is going to be a serious debate between orthodox academics. Ed Krupp is a major astronomer, Zahi Hawass, as we all know who he is, and people like myself and Robert Bauval. It's the first time that we've actually had the opportunity in public to sit down and debate the big issues. And I'd like to thank Abbas Nadim, the gentleman who first thought of this conference and set it in motion.
Yes, indeed. What an incredible concept. Even with all said about Zahi Hawass, and I know that you seem to have a new relationship with him, I noticed when I was there are two Dr. Hawasses. One is the Dr. Hawass who would like to greet you and shepherd you through seeing whatever it is you want to see while you're there. And the other is another Dr. Hawass who has a very quick flash temper. Would you agree?
Oh, yes, I would agree. I have quite a temper myself, although I'm trying to keep it under control. But Zahi Hawass is a powerful personality and a charismatic man.
Oh, yes.
He's a great talker. And he has, I have found through my meetings with him in December, which included 6 hours at the Sphinx and then a very long private discussion afterwards, I found him to be much more open-minded than I imagined him to be when he was just a bogeyman who I hadn't met, and I'd encountered his public statements, but I hadn't encountered him as an individual. Encountering him as an individual was a very interesting experience for me. First off, because I've said a lot of hard things about Zahi Hawass over the last couple of years, things which have certainly reached his ears in all manner of shape and form.
Well, I believe
he was willing to set that aside and sit down and discuss with me, and we got into quite a hot discussion about the antiquity of the Sphinx and about the meaning of the pyramids.
At one time, I believe that he responded to something you said by suggesting that he would have you thrown in a very deep pit and sever your head and...
That wasn't my head. That was Robert Bauval's head. Although Robert Bauval and I stand side by side on all of these issues. But yes, in the period of intense controversy and intense public speaking on these matters, there's no doubt that we said harsh things about Zahi, and Zahi said harsh things about us. And the conclusion we've come to is that this exchange of personal insults is absolutely useless to anybody.
Productive. Yeah, not at all productive.
Yeah, it's just not productive, and it was actually blocking any steps forward in this area. I do feel that the most important development of the last 2 years was the huge public interest in the matter, and the thousands and thousands, and I can tell you it was many thousands of letters that were written to Egyptian embassies and to the Egyptian government. And I think what these letters did was they made people in Egypt realize the depth of feeling on these matters, and that's why I'm pretty confident that we'll find Egypt much more responsive to our concerns in the future, and this conference is the first sign of that at least there's a willingness to sit down and really debate the issues, and to do so in public, not in private.
Now, I realize that it's a horrible thing to contemplate. However, I think the following is true. Because of the U.S. State Department warnings to Americans not to go to Egypt because of terrorist forecasts, and because they're very hungry over there, and because there is nobody going to Egypt right now, is it not more likely that they would be open to any grand project, properly administered?
There's no doubt that it's more likely. There's no doubt of that. I think the most important issue in all of this is to be completely honest about human nature, and there's no doubt that the Egyptians are desperate to see tourists return to Egypt.
All right.
And realize that this particular debate, this particular issue of the antiquity and meaning of the last surviving wonder of the ancient world is an issue that really does have a huge resonance in the public all around the world. So, but I see this as a natural development from what has happened, and it does create the opportunity for a new style of investigation to get underway in Egypt, and certainly there is a new spirit afoot. And I'd like to repeat, and I can only repeat my own impression. I have made more than 40 visits to Egypt, and I've traveled very extensively in that country. And my honest opinion, following the terrible disaster that happened last year, is that the Egyptian authorities have finally woken up to the necessary security steps that must be taken to protect tourists. If one is going to Egypt as a tourist, I would urge people as often as possible to travel independently to Egypt. The large tour group is inevitably a
target, yes.
But the individual traveling alone is not a target. And I can't tell you how many Egyptians came up to me in the street. They just came up to me in the street, not knowing me from anybody, and just said sorry. They said, we're so sorry about what happened at the Temple of Hatshepsut last year. The people of Egypt are devastated by this. It's such a contravention of their traditions and of their genuine warmth and hospitality that were such a thing ever to start again, you can be sure that the people of Egypt themselves would do everything they could to prevent it.
I certainly hope so. Wildcard Line, you're on the air with Graham Hancock in Great Britain. Where are you, please?
Art, this is 50,000 watts of power, KLH in Reno.
Reno, Nevada. Yes, sir.
Graham, I got two quick questions. I'll take an answer on the phone. I agree with what you say about the security of Egypt because the beggars in the street, and I used to live in Egypt for about a year, were always glad to see you, and they thanked you, and they were glad you were Americans, and they were glad you were there.
Absolutely.
My two quick questions are, I'd hired a professor from the university who taught Egyptian history for decades there, and I hired him on a daily basis during my year living there to guide me and give me an education. Two quick questions he couldn't answer exactly to my liking. One was, do they have a date now that they settled on when the Great Pyramids were built?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, Orthodox Egyptologists haven't changed their position on this throughout the 20th century, and they put the date at around 2500 BC. A little-known study of the mortar that was used to join the blocks together, mortar that contains organic materials and therefore is susceptible to carbon dating, has indicated that this date is incorrect and that the pyramid may be up to 1,000 years older than Egyptologists believe it to be, but certainly not 12,500 years old. That's not indicated by the carbon dating. So what the carbon dating indicates, and I have to stress with carbon dating, you can only date organic materials, and there are organic materials in the mortar. What it indicates is that the Egyptological scenario for the pyramid is completely wrong, but that the pyramid is not 12,500 years old, and that fits with my own views. I think the pyramid was probably built over a period of several hundred years, about in the 4th millennium BC rather than in the 3rd millennium BC, but I think that other aspects of the site, particularly the Great Sphinx, especially the Great Sphinx and the massive megalithic temples beside it, are vastly older and do date back 12,500 years. I think this is a site that's been completely misunderstood by Orthodox academics and that it has tremendous secrets to reveal to us.
I tend to agree with you from what I heard from him. The second question is, the Nile has switched its route of flowing along several places from Luxor to Abu Simbel up through Cairo. Has anybody done any soundings, and God forbid, like core drillings, within about a mile and a half or so of where they were presently at and the river where it presently runs, and/or is there some phase now that HARP could give some location of any underground buildings or structures like old mine shafts that they can do, I understand?
Undoubtedly the case. Aerial surveys are revealing new evidence all the time. I can give you an example of this, not at Giza, but at Angkor in Cambodia, where NASA aerial photographs have revealed an evidence, very convincing, definite evidence of a much earlier layer of construction at Angkor. So Angkor Wat, as it looks today, was built in 1150 AD, but what this aerial photography has shown is that it stands on top of a much more ancient site. And I think that the same techniques applied to Egypt, and they haven't been applied to Egypt extensively yet, could yield fascinating information. And the old course of the Nile, which in the Giza area is not so different today from how it was many thousands of years ago, is a particularly promising area for excavation.
Well, Graham, we're rapidly running out of time. Your books, all of them, I take it now, save the one that you're still writing about Mars at the moment.
Well, that's the Mars Mystery. It's coming out on June 15th, and I'm going to be traveling in America to talk about that book for 2 weeks in the second half of June.
Well, in that case, obviously by then we will all be back from the cruise and the great debate, and there would, I would hope, be another opportunity while you're here in the States to interview you again.
I'd love to do that, Art, because the story of Mars is just the most mysterious story in the solar system. And it tells us so much about ourselves and our predicament on this planet.
One last real clincher question. You expressed that you feel there is great danger for Earth and that it is imminent. Do you have any sort of timeline?
Yes, I do. Before the year 2030, it's the fragments of a giant comet. This is what the whole book that I've done on Mars is really focusing on. It's the fragments of a giant comet. The astronomy behind this is absolutely 100% sound, the top academics. And you see, a comet in itself is a relatively, for a comet, a full comet to hit the Earth is something that doesn't easily happen. But what people don't understand is that when these comets fragment, and when you have a giant comet, which is 400 kilometers across, fragmenting, then these fragments spread out along the whole of the orbit of the original comet, and they create a much bigger target for the Earth to collide with. And the evidence is that we have a 30-kilometer fragment of comet on an Earth-crossing orbit, which will hit us before the year 2030 unless we do something about it.
Kind of like a sawed-off shotgun. Graham, we're out of time.
Yes, nice to talk to you.
I will see you in Alaska in May.
Looking forward to it.
Take care, my friend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That's Graham Hancock. I'm Art Bell. This is Coast to Coast AM.